Darkly Sweet, Chapter 28. Which, when we got home, I climbed over Zach to get out. He kind of oomphed when I accidentally kneed him in the stomach. Then I was safely on my own 2 feet, in my heels and jeans. I pulled out a lollipop and unwrapped it slowly while Zach and Vine got out. "Are you okay?" Zach frowned, studying me. "Did the date or Ian bother you?" I smiled brightly. "I just want to get out of these crazy pants. I tried, but normal isn't really me, apparently." Viney climbed out and glared at me. "You looked fine. It's not the jeans' fault that Ian showed up. That he hit on you shows that they make you look good. Good isn't my thing either." I stumbled ahead Viney and Zach in my heels, so I didn't hear what else they said. I really needed some time to be alone and light something on fire. I got to my room, changed into a cute skirt, and then flopped on my bed with Senior Mort. I gazed into his eyes and stroked his fur. It's been such a long week. And short. So busy. I still haven't found Zach's love key. I groaned and rolled over. Senior Mort patted over my shoulder and nibbled on my sleek hair, apparently finding it deliciously weird. I need to thank him for driving us back, and apologize for kneeing him. I still had no idea what kind of girl he liked. He needed to show me pictures, or I could go for Lars. Out of all the brainy bunch, he was by far the least irritating. Viney pounded on my door. "What are you doing?" "Bonbons and macaroons." I was going to decapitate her with a pool cue. I made a face at Senior Mort and put him back in his cage with a snack before I padded to the door in my brand new polka dot socks. I opened the door and smiled brightly at Viney. "What's up? Can I come in?" I exhaled slowly before I nodded and stepped back. She walked over to the swing and sat down, having to stretch out her tiptoes to reach the floor. Apparently, Drake had hung it to my height. My stomach contracted at the thought of Drake standing with his arms above his head, screwing in my swing with his miniature screwdriver. "You like a guy, right?" I stared at her. "What?" "If it's not another guy, how do you hang around with Drake and Ian and not get crazy? After that first time, with the shake, you should be as obsessed with Drake as every other girl." I stared at her. "I think Drake's evil. I want a nice guy." She frowned at me. "A nice guy? What does that even mean?" I shrugged. "You know, someone you can trust." She made a sound of disgust. "You can't trust a mage. Maybe a human guy, I don't know, but never a mage. I figure if you're going to have one, may as well get one of the ones who are honest about what he is. Drake's a jerk, yeah, but he doesn't pretend to be anything else." "So, you think that Drake's an honest, evil mage?" She shrugged and leaned forward, then back, swinging higher. I don't know. I thought I knew everything about him, but lately I've been confused." I nodded as I climbed on my bed, sitting cross-legged. He's really confusing, but they all are. Like, there is kind of a guy, but I don't think he even notices me. And then, with the way Drake is, he probably thinks I'm into Drake instead of him. She frowned at me. "I just find it inconceivable that you can think about another guy when you have Drake licking malted off you. I've seen the way you look at Drake, staring at him like he's the most beautiful piece of cake at the tea party. The way that you blush, the way you act when Whitley is around him. You do like him, but somehow you can control it. Is it a spell you use? A potion?" I shifted uncomfortably. How I was with Drake was considered controlled. "I guess I'm looking for something else." "Someone nice," she said skeptically. I sighed. "It's pretty stupid, but yeah. I want a nice mage." She hopped off the swing, graceful for someone so short. I'd be bored with a mage who wasn't at least a little bit wicked. "I'm running to the kitchen for a snack." She left, and I stared at my bed for a long time before turning towards the door. I needed to talk to Zach and find his love key. Viney didn't even think of Zach like that. Look at him, because he wasn't like Drake or Ian. I walked across the lilac room and held up my hand for a long time before I let my fist hit the wood of Zach's door. I glanced over at the couch where Drake had been playing guitar earlier. He'd been far too good to be Zach's student, so he'd lied on that day he'd come here saying it was for guitar lessons. What was Drake's wicked game? Zach opened the door and I whirled around, beaming at him, but my smile faltered when I noticed what he was wearing. What he wasn't wearing, which was a shirt. He had really nice muscles and silky-looking skin. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you'd be half naked. Never mind. I edged away from him, trying not to notice so much skin. He lifted his lips in a half smile. It's fine. It doesn't bother me if it doesn't bother you. I held up my hand so I could only see his face above it. It really bothers me. Zach, you are so beautiful. He kind of blushed and I bit my lip. Bonbons and macaroons, this was going well. Penny, did you need something? Yes. I wanted to thank you for coming to town to pick us up after we had that weird tangent on our date. Also, I'm sorry I kept climbing over you in the car. He grinned widely. Are you really going to hold your hand up like that until I put on a shirt? I lowered it slowly, caught a glimpse of his chest, and brought my hand back up. It's weird, isn't it, okay? I can handle it. I put my hand down and kept my eyes firmly closed. So thanks for the ride, and... Zach laughed and grabbed my hand, pulling me into his room. I stumbled and saw a whirl of black and white before I landed on a soft bed. Zach pulled his shirt over his head, crossed his arms, and shook his head. You're a funny girl. I gave a strangled laugh. Who doesn't love to laugh? I want you to show me pictures of all the girls you've ever liked. So subtle, Penny. As if this couldn't get more awkward. He just shrugged and flopped on the bed beside me, making me bounce while his arm brushed my hip. He lay back, arms behind his head, and pointed at the wall opposite the bed. I stared at him for a second, that fascinating muscle on the back of his arm like Ian had. A little longer. Not quite as defined, but somehow so interesting. I turned my head quickly and then froze when I saw the poster hanging on his wall. The girl was in an action shot, bodysuit glistening and bumpy, black like the rest of her clothes and hair. She stared at the camera, eyes black as pitch, skin painted white with black mouth, eyes shaped with black coal. A cape rippled around her, black. She must have just spun around and started walking forward. I glanced to the right and saw part of an arm that had been cut off. I could see her hand, though the thumbnail bitten to the quick and painted white. Do you know who that is? He asked. I swallowed. I had a cousin who was into all that stuff. I never saw any of the performances, fights. I'm not sure what you call them. I couldn't stop staring at that white thumbnail. Sometimes tourney or competition, duel, challenge. The bed bounced while he shrugged. I was sitting on Zach's bed with him, and all I could think about was that jagged thumbnail. My heart pounded. He cleared his throat. Maybe it seems stupid, but if you'd ever seen her fight, you'd know why I'm transfixed with her. I turned my head to stare at him. Transfixed with? That's the female that you like. Wow! She's really cool. How many dates have you gone on? His face froze kind of, and he shook his head. I haven't actually dated her. Oh, but you're friends. Maybe you guys hang out a lot online. My stomach churned with anxiety and something else I hadn't felt for a long time. I stared at Zach and tried to look interested instead of homicidal. I don't actually know her, but I know everything about her. Wow. So, you like someone you've never met? His eyes narrowed at me. I expected denial. Not. I love her. There isn't anyone else in the world that will ever compare to Pitch. I closed my eyes for a long time before I got off the bed and walked over to the poster, brushing my fingers over that white nail and the sliver of arm. So, if Pitch came up to you and told you that she wanted to marry you, I'd be the happiest person in the world. What would you do together? Play video games. My voice sounded strangely emotionless. We'd fight in tourneys together. I laughed and glanced over my shoulder at him. So, you're a fighter, Zach? Do you have a cloak and a bodycon suit? He nodded, still dead serious. I stared at him, seeming so nice and sensible. But this was absolute insanity. He was in love with someone he'd never met. How did that make any sense? It didn't. It absolutely did not. And I was supposed to marry him, but this wouldn't work, would it? Could I possibly get Zach to marry me when he was in love with someone else? Maybe I could tell him I was Pitch. No. I smiled brightly instead of screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. Well, I wish you the best with that. Is she fighting somewhere I can go see her? If you fell in love with her just by that, it's got to be incredible. He got this horrible melancholy look on his face. She hasn't fought in over a year. She just disappeared. I don't know what happened to her, but she's not dead. He swallowed hard, and the veins in his neck stood out before he took a deep breath. Some people say that she goes to school in Blackheart. Others say that she went to school here, but that she's already graduated and gone to Darkside. One girl in Blackheart claimed to be Pitch, but she broke both legs doing Pitch's signature, twist jet, so it clearly wasn't her. That's terrible. Is the girl okay? He blinked at me. Who cares? She lied about being Pitch. She deserves to be gutted. I stared at Zach and nodded slowly. He was the epitome of a rabid fan, and he'd seemed so nice. Nice, a mage. I was too stupid to live. So, no one knows what she looks like. He shrugged and pulled out his computer. I've done some work and I've come up with this. He turned the screen to face me, and I stared at a girl who looked a lot like an animated wit. Only the hair was longer, and the skirt was tighter, and her top shorter to show her narrow waist without any noticeable muscle definition, and scooped low to show off her ample bosom. Wow. She's really voluptuous and rocker chick. Apparently, he didn't like cute at all. I inhaled deeply before I slammed the computer lid closed and stared at it under my shaking fingers. Words trembled on the tip of my tongue about how pathetic and ridiculous he was, how nonsensical his emotional connection to some fantasy he had. Of course, I'd decided to marry someone based on an internet profile and a 5-minute video. I exhaled and leaned over, resting my head on his shoulder, while I took deep, even breaths. I think I get it. Sometimes we need heroes far enough away from us that we can't touch them. It's safe that way, easier. He put a hand on my shoulder, and we sat like that until my skin felt itchy, my scalp tight. I sat up and gave him a wry smile. I am so wired from the tiramisu. I'm sorry I'm so weird. Thanks for explaining about Pitch. I think I get you a little bit better now. I left the room and closed the door, leaning on it heavily while I stared into space. This was the guy I was supposed to marry. I went over to the couch and flopped down, my legs dangling over the end. My body curved in the cushions that had held Drake not long ago, bent over the guitar like he didn't see me. Was he obsessed with someone else like Pitch? I inhaled deeply while I closed my eyes and smelled a hint of black cherry before Vine walked in, carrying a tray of food. I didn't feel like talking, and neither did Viney. She stabbed a bite of hash browns on her fork, perfect late-night food. Seeing Ian I gave her a wan smile. If you want to talk about it. She shook her head, her gaze unfocused before she frowned at me. We should go. Go. Friday nights, the Makis have their volleys, and on Saturday night, it's the chemists. Chemists? Chemistry club. Do you want to go see the guys wrestle around? I hesitated. It's been kind of a long day. Jean and bra shopping going on my first date. Almost killing the cool redhead with a ball. All that tiramisu, not to mention that teeny tiny car ride where the back seat was so close to the windshield. And pitch. I made a face and ripped a bagel apart viciously. Pitch! I took a deep breath as I glared at the bagel. Apparently, Zach is completely in love with some girl he hasn't even met. She laughed. That look on your face, you haven't ever crushed on someone. I shook my head slowly. No. Maybe I should. If I can be in love with someone I can't possibly have, then there's no risk of loving a real person. I should fall in love with someone like that. Someone out of reach. So he can never break my heart. I bit my lip hard and smiled at her. So, that's the only female he ever liked. She nodded and rested her elbows on the table, absently tapping her chin. Zach and Drake were friends pretty much forever. I haven't known Zach that long, really only since last year when She shook her head. Sometimes I feel sorry for him. Zach. Drake. She gave me a flat glance. He's worshipped, so he can't be loved. I only really talked to him last year when he asked me to help Zach. She shrugged and wrapped her arms around her body like she was cold. He's been around so much lately that I feel like I almost know him. And he's nothing like I thought he would be. I thought he'd always be cool and aloof. But he's making you gingerbread houses. And doing community service, climbing towers, and pas de freaking do with a beginner. If he did that to me, I would kick him in the balls. I mean, he's nothing like I thought he'd be, and I was desperately in love with him for years. Years! I admit it. My room was plastered with posters of him, and I was worse than Zach. I stalked him all the time. I wrote him these sick letters and honestly thought that I knew him. She looked up at me slightly guilty and kind of sad-looking. I stared at her. Viney was obsessed with Drake, but Drake was always flirting with me. Was it her he actually liked and just using me for a decoy? I smiled brightly. You're really cool, Vine. I think that Drake probably likes you. She rolled her eyes. No, he doesn't. The thing is, the more I get to know him, the less my desperate obsession makes any sense. I wanted to be with Ian just so I wouldn't think about Drake, but it didn't even help, not really. I just felt more stupid afterwards. But you're still into him? She sighed deeply and shot me this weird look, part excited, part guilty. It's chemist, like I... Zach came out of his room wearing black, soft clothing that looked like pajamas or ninja clothes to me. Oh, hi. I thought you were going to bed, Penny. Viney gripped my arm. We're talking about boys. It's girl talk, so you can be on your way. Good luck. Don't drop dead or anything. He sneered at her before he spun and left us alone. Chemist, she hissed, turning back to me. It's the boys' combat team. Once you see Drake compete, you'll understand why I am what I am, and maybe you'll become a Drake groupie. Well, that sounds fun. Then I can throw mashed potatoes at any girl he looks at. What else do groupies do? Are there shirts? There should be t-shirts. I want one. I want 5. And I want them all to be glow in the dark or scratch and sniff. She stared at me blankly before she sighed and pushed away from the table. Come on, weird girl. You're going to need a cloak. And some black pants. Don't tell anyone that I let you wear my stuff. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 29. Witch. We sat at the front of the bleachers with little lights illuminating the steps and aisles so no one fell to their death climbing to their seats. Viney leaned forward, gripping the metal railing with her chipped black nails while we waited for the tourney to begin. I pulled my cloak tighter around me as a chilly breeze picked up and more people crowded into the bleachers. The hood would probably make my hair frizzy. I'd wrapped a black scarf around my lower face, because we were all ninjas. Since the entire school showed up to this thing, you'd think that they'd do it during the day. At least that's what I thought before an explosion of gold showered down as a dragon came to life above us, breathing fire that I could feel on my skin. I held my breath as the gold beast arched its back and clawed the sky. The sound of embers popping, the heat on my cheeks, and the scent of sandalwood swept away the rest of the audience. I gripped the railing while I stared up as the dragon beat its wings, rising slowly, wind blowing back my hood. Of course, it wasn't a real dragon. It seemed to fix its eyes on me before it bent its slender neck and shot a blast of flame. I gasped and flinched back as the flame spread above my head. It didn't burn my skin, but a few fly-away hairs shriveled up around my face that felt like crinkled wire when I pressed my palms against my cheeks. I turned to Viney, who had an arm across her face, guarding it from the flames. Were they using actual fire with their projected holographs? That was risky and unbelievably cool. My heart still pounded as I refocused my attention on the ring below. There was a 20-foot gap between the bleachers and the platform in the center. A man seemed to step out of thin air, his lean body covered in what looked like orange liquid metal that covered him from scalp to toe. Body conscious didn't begin to describe it. Every muscle was orange liquid, delineating every bump and bulge. I gasped as he spun around, and I saw the full frontal. It was nothing, just a man wearing holographs with a codpiece like a ballerina man. But I really wanted to hold up my hand and block out the bits that made my breathing weird. That's Oscar. He's not too bad. I turned to look at Viney and was glad for the ninja mask, so no one could see my face on fire from blushing so hard. Oscar Cranky Pants from Study Hall was the naked orange man. Not that he was really naked. He must be wearing some kind of skin-colored suit, filled with light receptors. He wasn't really naked, and those weren't really his veins that the orange light flowed through over his body. The orange light flashed brighter and seemed to take a shape, almost like the light was growing out of his skin in tiny scales that expanded until they were quarter-sized. It only took a few seconds for the whole process, Oscar sprouting orange light armor, but when he was done, he looked really spectacular. He walked across the stage, but he didn't walk like a geeky student. Instead, he seemed to float over the platform like a dancer, moving faster and faster until near the edge he leapt spectacularly high, arms stretched above his head. Fingers outstretched to grasp something I couldn't see until he touched it. At that touch, the object flared to life. A 2-foot sword that flickered like it was liquid metal that ran up or down depending how he held the blade. He came down gracefully to one knee, sword held perpendicular to his body, head bowed. The audience surged to their feet, cheering before they settled back down. I glanced over at Vine, who met my eyes, but I couldn't read her expression because we were ninjas. Another man materialized on the opposite side of the platform, but he didn't come out naked. He already had purple armor that glowed like liquid metal. He came out of thin air holding his fire metal sword. Orange reflected in a ripple through the purple sword that flickered like fire as he raised his weapon and charged Oscar. I gasped and flinched back as the purple fire wrapped around Oscar, but his sword shifted, spreading out to become an orange shield, flames licking the black platform until I thought I could smell singed wood. Oscar shoved back the purple fighter with his sword shield, and then swung the orange flame sword at the purple warrior. There was a flash of light, orange and purple waves, that spread from the epicenter of the clash into the audience. I gasped as waves of purple and orange light lapped around me like water without temperature. I shuddered and wiped my hands on the black skirt Viney had let me have because it was too long for her, before I focused once more on the platform. The two fighters danced more than fought. No doubt years of ballet was to blame for those incredible and not very practical leaps by Oscar, met by the terrifying spinning ability of the purple warrior. "Who is the purple guy?" I hissed at Viney. "Pete," she answered without turning her head. Pete spun, purple fire from his sword forming a kind of tornado around his body, purple fire flicking, sucking everything into that spinning vortex. My hair escaped from my cloak, strands rippling towards the purple warrior, and I gripped the bar, feeling pressure from behind me as the audience was pulled towards Pete. Oliver struggled to maintain his distance, but he slid over the floor, struggling to stay away from that flame. But Pete kept spinning with his purple flame rising 30 feet into the night sky. My cloak flapped around me, until eventually Oscar had no option other than accepting the inevitable. He jumped up and turned towards Pete, forming his orange flame into a shield as he struck the purple column of fire with Pete in the center. The impact threw me back into the knees of the person sitting behind me, while my hands gripped the metal railing, straining my shoulders. I couldn't see anything through the purple and orange flash of light. When I blinked the world into focus and felt more singed hair hanging around my face, Pete was staggering around on the platform, and Oscar was lying on the ground. I gripped Viney's arm. "Is he okay?" She stared at the scene and shook her head slightly. Pete lost control. It was just lucky that he came out of that without getting decapitated. "I'm sure Oscar will be fine." She covered my hand with hers as guys dressed in black scrambled up to the platform and surrounded Oscar. I waited for them to pick him up, but instead they moved closer, shoulder to shoulder, until little white bits of lightning flickered between the guys inside their circle. The crowd murmured while Viney's grip grew painful, and I realized that I was holding my breath. Oscar sat up with a gasp. An orange light flickered over his skin, tracing his veins. At least what I could see around the men with the lightning flickers. I stared at those men and barely heard the cheer of the crowd as Oscar staggered to his feet, naked besides orange light that traced his veins. The circle of men stepped black, lightning vanishing into their hands, tiny flickers of electrical current that stirred a memory I'd buried long ago. I gasped as I saw a barn field, burnt and smoking, the remains of a black car crumpled in the middle of the field, without any tire or skid marks that led to the crash, just the car in the field while I sat there, staring at it. My bare feet poked up to the gray sky, streaked in black and red. I inhaled, but I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in my own lungs, metallic taste in my mouth like copper pennies. Penny. A dark figure bent over me, his hands spread with miniature lightning dancing between them, lightning that made everything disappear. "Penny!" Viney's voice came from far away, and with effort I blinked her into focus where she bent towards me, eyes bright with excitement, while her lower face was still covered in black fabric. "Is it over?" The crowd was hushed while she shook her head and turned back to the platform, pointing as the golden dragon came back, erupting in the sky, shooting flame that was still warm on my skin. But it seemed further away. Everything seemed further away, even Viney pressed to my side and gripping my arm. I had to go. I had to draw a picture of that scene. The man with lightning, the car in the field. I had to do something before I forgot it again. I shook my head because I couldn't press through the crowd around us, couldn't slip away from the fight unnoticed, not unless I climbed down through the bars in front of me. The dragon circled tightly as a howl filled the night, a sound that sent a chill running down my spine. Green eyes opened floating on the far side of the platform, enormous eyes the size of a body, and then the head-formed muzzle, sharp teeth, and green fur. The rest of the wolf took shape even as the creature leapt skyward, jaws locking around the dragon's throat. They tumbled through the air, curled together like an enormous burning yin-yang sign down to the ground, and then exploded in tiny gold and green flecks that danced in the air like diamonds. I could see my reflection in the green and golden specks the size of my fingernail. I tried to catch one in my hand, but when I opened it, there wasn't anything in my palm. Viney snorted at me for trying to catch light, then nudged me with her sharp elbow. I looked down in time to see the golden specks swirl and cluster around a figure that took shape. A man who stepped forward dressed in luminescent liquid gold armor, but bare-skinned from wrist to elbow. Intricate patterns made of golden light formed on his forearms and the back of his hands. They flared brighter as he brought his hands up in an intricate movement, like the Tai Chi Revere performed every morning, but Revere's hands didn't light up, so not nearly as cool. The crowds exploded in hisses, boos with a smattering of applause, and shrieks of pure female appreciation. Viney beside me hissed with a lot of venom, which I understood when the guy turned his head, seeming to look directly at me and winked. It was Golden-Eyed Boy from earlier. I slouched in my seat and pulled my hood low. So that's what Ian's doing in town. I hope that Drake kills him. Viney's voice trembled with anticipation. Drums beat slow, while Ian walked the perimeter of the platform, arms outstretched, smirk on his mouth as he waited to be adored. The drums picked up speed and then screeching like guitars and violins in a melody that I could have sworn I knew. Isn't that the song Drake was playing on his guitar? Viney flashed me a glare before refocusing on the platform, leaning forward, holding her breath, hands white where she gripped the bar. When the song had reached a screaming pitch, a cloud of green smoke began drifting around the platform, more and more smoke until it began to shake like someone was stirring it up, and then green streaks outlined a body, and there was Drake. He didn't look like Drake, not with his bare chest drawn over with intricate shapes, star patterns like the pattern on his cheek that lit his green eyes. His eyes glowed green as he curled his lips and stalked towards Ian. His eyes weren't really glowing. They couldn't be. He was wearing some kind of eye protection that would enhance his vision and make his eyes look like that. He wore pants but no shoes. No shoes, no shirt, no service. He moved like silk rippling in the wind, like falling, like ink spilling in water, as effortless as it was inevitable. I couldn't help leaning forward, studying the movement of his muscles, the clench and fall of his body. My fingers tingled and I tasted black cherry. Drake! Viney's scream shattered the air, the sound of passionate obsession breaking through my own rapture. I gasped and released the bar, pressing my hands together, digging my nails into my skin until I could feel pain instead of Drake's breath on my cheek, his thighs pressed against mine. Drake looked over at Viney, his eyebrows lowering into a scowl that made his cheekbones sharper, lips fuller and slightly parted. Viney went crazy, jumping up and down, waving her arms like a complete idiot while I sat there, paralyzed. Everyone around me was on their feet screaming and chanting while I tried to shrink into my own skin. Drake's expression changed, one eyebrow rising as he seemed to look directly at me before he threw a hand wide and bowed to the crowd. I'd thought the crowd was already insane, but they jerked and stamped, pressing me forward against the bars while Viney clocked me with one of her wild fists. The crowd began to jump in time with the drum beat. Thump, 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 until I was sure that the bleachers would crack and we'd all plummet to our deaths. Drake grinned wickedly for one moment, seeming to stare directly at me before he whirled around in time to be engulfed in Ian's golden flames. My heart pounded as he disappeared for a moment before hissing and sizzling filled the air like water on hot metal. Drake stepped forward, still surrounded by the golden fire, but he was clearly illuminated in green until with a dull roar like breakers crashing, the flames were extinguished with a wall of green liquid and clouds of roiling steam. Drake stepped towards Ian, a look of amusement on his face. He raised his hands and gestured, "Bring it on," or something. Ian grinned wickedly before he ran towards Drake. a liquid metal sword flowing out of Ian's hands close to Drake's head. Drake bent backwards beneath the thrust of the sword, then twisted and punched the side of the blade away while he slammed his foot into Ian's chest. Ian flew away from Drake's mighty kick, a green footprint on his chest, flickering brightly before gold flames bubbled up, eating away the green. Drake grinned at the audience, like he was sharing a joke with us, and the crowd roared, drowning out the music while Drake threw back his head and howled. Ian ran into him, streaks of gold flickering over his skin as he plowed into Drake, knocking him down to the platform. The audience gasped, and in that moment of almost silence, I could have sworn I heard Drake laugh on the platform in Ian's golden fire embrace. What followed was a series of holds and grips that I couldn't follow. My head was buzzing, and the world was getting fuzzy around the edges. I needed a lollipop. I needed to stop staring at Drake while he strained against Ian, body against body, muscles rippling and skin glittering like green diamonds. I felt like he was straining against me, my hand on his chest, feeling the curve of his muscles beneath my fingers that burned instead of tingled where I clenched them. I dug my nails into my skin, but the pain seemed far away, everything distant besides Drake. Skin illuminated green. Drake had Ian down against the platform in a headlock, crushing Ian down until Ian twisted and knocked Drake back. They circled each other, both with lips parted, chests rising and falling heavily. Ian pulled his golden flame sword out of the air, and Drake followed suit, arm muscles bunching, as he lifted the green liquid metallic instrument in a salute. The two men leapt at each other, light erupting when their swords clashed with a hissing sound and a cloud of steam. The wave of light lapped against me, my skin tightening against that phantom caress, as though Drake's breath brushed my skin. I shuddered and dug my nails deeper. The swords flashed, clash after clash, that rocked through the crowds until I was hyperventilating with every stroke, every lunge and parry until Ian broke away, holding up his hands at Drake to hold him back. Ian lunged forward and back, familiar movements I'd seen Revere make, but with gold rippling over his skin, much more impressive, and I almost managed to get my breathing under control. Before golden geometric shapes burst out of Ian's hands, then sparks of red bounced inside the shapes, stretching them out larger and larger, more and more red sparks, until a figure took shape. In those shapes, until the golden geometric melted away, leaving a crimson Jackson standing on the platform. He whirled around in a spray of red sparks and ran towards Drake. Drake fell back, kicking Jackson's knee out, throwing off his lunge. Drake's hands moved in this rhythmic motion in time to the music that built and built at the same time he fought off Jackson, using mostly his legs but sometimes his hands, ducking beneath the swing of the crimson sparks before he shoved his hands forward, a green spear shooting towards Jackson, and growing larger. Large enough that a man wrapped in blue light could stand inside of the triangle. Zack looked very different as he burst out of the green lines and stalked towards Jackson in his liquid bodysuit, the blue emphasizing his eyes, or maybe his eyes were glowing like Drake's. I breathed shallowly as Jackson and Zack fought in the center of the platform, while Drake and Ian paced the perimeter like two hungry predators who were vying for the lesser creatures' carcasses. Zack and Jackson were not shabby. I tried to watch objectively, tried to take the movement apart instead of being caught up in the audience. The excitement, the obsession. Drake said something low that I couldn't hear, and Zack's head swung around, his eyes meeting Drake's for a second before he grinned brightly, the least Zack-like smile I'd ever seen on him. That smile said wild and fierce, uncontrollable and untamed. Jackson attacked low, and Zack leapt up, flipping backwards in a widespread, lazy movement before he landed and whirled, cutting across Jackson's unprotected left before he punched the sword arm hard, then an elbow to his face, while twisting Jackson's arm hard enough that Jackson cried out. Wasn't that his broken arm? I winced for Jackson while his spark sword flickered out. Ian came forward, fighting with his golden sword, blowing Zack back with golden flames that laid him out before Drake came forward, yelling, green sword in his hand. The final duel was a blur of green and gold. The only thing in focus was Drake's face, his eyes full of raw determination and will that would crush the entire world if it opposed him. When Ian broke, losing his rhythm, his foot twisting, Drake kicked forward, his stance too wide and his knee cocked out. It could be easily dislocated in that position. Revere had explained it to me when I asked him why he did this, why he did that, why he held his hands out like a birdie, why he kept his knee at that precise angle every time he bent. Drake's knee wasn't perfect. I blinked and could almost see it objectively, the climax of Ian fighting against Drake's sword. Ian who didn't take advantage of the imperfect knee. I stood beside Viney and watched them fight, but the audience became a dull roar from far away as I saw another fight. Far away, where a blue light exploded into the crowd, knocking them back before the mob ripped me apart. I closed my eyes and saw the crowds around me, dark, writhing, chanting as they surged, a scream piercing the rumblings as someone got trampled. I blinked my eyes open in time to see green fire leap from Drake's hands while he stood in that imperfect stance. Green fire that wrapped around Ian until he crumpled, green flames flowing off him onto the platform, leaving the distinct scent of black cherry in the air. It was perfectly silent for a moment before everyone went wild, screaming, chanting, the crowd swaying while Viney to my left screamed the loudest, her whole soul drawn out in one rapturous cry that made my head hurt. I stood there while the crowd pushed against me, pressing me against the railing until I couldn't take it another moment. I vaulted over the rail, dropping the 10 feet down to the hard-packed earth, and began running along the perimeter of the ring. Viney yelled my name, but I couldn't stay there any longer. There had to be an opening that led out of the tournament. Too soon bodies surged around me, heading towards the platform, pushing me as I struggled away from them until finally I reached a narrow alley between sections that led out into a wide field. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 30. Witch. I ran through the field even though my eyes hadn't adjusted to the darkness. I ran and ran until I stumbled on a dirt clod, fell down on my face, and rolled in the dirt. I lay there panting, my legs tangled in Viney's cloak until my eyes adjusted and I could make out the stars stretched above me. They spread out magnificently, so lovely, so unbelievably far away and perfect. I wanted to be one of those stars, shining brightly in the darkness while nothing touched it. Nothing came too close to diminish the bright beauty. I kept my eyes wide on the stars while tears trickled out the corners, melting the dim lights into one blurry mess. My heart pounded in my chest so hard, too hard, I put a hand on my right side where I was missing pieces of 2 ribs. Those 2 pieces were probably lodged in my heart, and that's why it hurt so much. Bonbons and macaroons, peanut brittle and pink taffy, cupcakes and pecan pralines, gumballs and ice cream cones. That is a terrifying spell. Who are you cursing? I gritted my teeth as I lay there, trying to ignore the sultry voice, a voice I'd only heard a few times but already knew far too well. Ian. I sat up and gripped my skirt with my hands. It's not a curse, but a blessing. You must have never had really good peanut brittle. Is there anything better? My voice came out clogged and horrible, but I managed a bright smile. His cheek still had a gold light pattern on it like a sunburst, so I could clearly see him out of my periphery as he sat down about a leg's length away from me. I did not rip off his leg and beat him to death with it. Yay, me. What's wrong? Did you finally realize that Viney is in love with another? I inhaled shakily. No, I think that I don't like crowds or violence. I feel sick. If you dislike those two things, you should definitely stay away from tourneys and Drake Huntsmans. I closed my eyes tightly. I wanted to be alone. I needed to be alone. This would be a test of endurance, like one of the times I was forced to sit on the dining room table for hours and hours without eating, while the hired people threw food at me. I couldn't show my vulnerability because it would only encourage someone like Ian. Telling him to leave me alone would only make him linger. If only I could stomach throwing myself at a guy. It's not as easy as it sounds, at least the Drake part. I didn't know that he was the guy Viney was obsessed with. Does he know? It would be hard for him not to. Such a cruel mage. She's had a thing for him forever. Too bad Drake doesn't want what's attainable. Too bad for you. He laughed, low and delicious. But the wrong kind of delicious, and it just made me ache. Like being presented with a piece of lemon meringue pie, when all I wanted was black cherry. Anything. I breathed deeply through my mouth, but the scent of citrus still lingered. Too bad. I studied him. The sunburst on his cheek that seemed to be fading out. What about you? Why do you seduce random girls? Don't you care who you're with? You sound like a romantic. I have the happy fortune of being able to see beauty and charm in anyone. I can appreciate your attributes just like I can admire vines, however different they are. That seems very strange to me. Letting people close is dangerous. Physical closeness is different from emotional. It's easy for a mage to disassociate the body from the heart. It's easy for most witches, but I think that you're right to be cautious. You're not like the rest of them. He leaned back on his elbows, staring up at the sky, his cheekbone throbbing with the golden shimmering pattern. So, you don't like violence. That's a pity. There is so much violence in the world, it's easier if you can enjoy it. Even when you lose. He laughed, a sound of pure sensual decadence, but it didn't fill me with anything but nausea. Not that I wasn't already nauseous. I needed to be alone, needed to scream into my pillow and feel Signor's little heart thumping against mine. Especially when I lose. I don't mind losing to Drake. He doesn't like to lose when he's playing a game. I think that's a warning for you, little witch. I'm not very little. He glanced over at me, his eyes golden and gleaming. That's true. Your hair is very big. How long have you been growing it? I shrugged. Forever. I did cut a little bit off with Viney, but a trim doesn't count, does it? He shook his head. Lips pursed. Certainly not. Would you like to stay here all night, or are you about ready to go in? I'll need to cast a spell if you don't want to be disturbed by other interested parties. I frowned at him. We've met once. Why are you offering to cast spells for me? He cocked his head as he stared at me. You really don't know? He leaned close and inhaled deeply, like he was smelling me. The scent of citrus bloomed in the night. You are very lovely. His voice was low, his eyes glowing brighter as he stared at me. I swallowed and stood up. Thanks. You too. I've never seen anyone with such perfectly symmetrical features. I started in the direction that was probably the school. He smiled widely as he stood up, brushing off his clothes, and followed me. I am the third most attractive mage in the world. I glanced over at him. Really? Only the third. That seems strange to me. I mean, if you think that you're in the top 3, why not claim first place or at least second? He sighed and ran a hand over his short hair. Drake is the second most attractive mage. I hope you never meet the prettiest mage, because after you see him, you'll never be able to look at anyone else. Sounds terrifying. Oh, Theodore Prince is perfectly terrible. Top 3 most despicable mages in the world, but not the worst. That's you? He laughed. Oh, no. I'm number 3 on both counts. You're practically safe with me. The worst mage is Drake. Prince comes in at a distant second. What does that mean, being the worst mage? He has the most vanity, violence, deception, but also determination. When he puts his mind to some nefarious plot, there's no point in struggling against him because he will get what he wants, whatever that is. I shivered and wrapped my arms around my body. Drake had asked me to a dance, but had seemed okay when I'd said no. He'd made me gingerbread and held my hand when I'd been afraid. What part of his wicked scheme was that? He was probably trying to make me fall in love with him so desperately that when he broke my heart, I would never feel whole again. I felt like my heart was already broken. Maybe he had to fix my heart before it was any good to break. So this other mage, Theodore Prince, is the second worst mage? You three all just took a census, and when you found out that you three were all so terrible, you decided to have a club, get together, and discuss how best to ruin everything in the world. He laughed. Something like that. To be fair, I'm not as awful as I used to be, so maybe Drake and Prince have changed their ways as well. I've been out of the country for a long time. Drake seems slightly altered, more responsible. I glanced over at him. Do mages get better? I didn't think that was possible. He grinned cheerfully. Oh, we do. Better and better all the time, if we're not getting worse. We're about to be interrupted. Ian, that's where you wandered off to. Have you finished here, or do you need a few more minutes? I stiffened as Drake's voice enveloped me in this mix of longing and anger that made my heart pound and my mouth water. I wanted to hurl myself at him and beat my fists against his chest, screaming all the candies in the world. Maybe just wrap my arms around him and cry on his chest. How humiliating. Macaroons and bonbons. It's Drake. I crossed my arms as a figure melted out of the shadows. Drake's skin still tinted green, and the star shape on his cheek, glistening brightly. Evening, lollipop girl. Except it's morning now. Shouldn't you be safely tucked in bed? His eyes gleamed at me, glittering green, while his lips curled in a dangerous smile. My breathing hitched, and I took a half step closer to Ian. Yes. I thought it would be fun to watch a tourney, but it turns out that I'm not much for violence. Or tourneys, Ian added, giving me a slow wink. Drake smiled and stepped closer to me. That is bad luck. I don't think you like dating Viney or shopping either. It's terrible, a Saturday completely wasted. Maybe tomorrow will be better, full of sparkles, rainbows, ponies, and pets. I nodded and edged away from him again. But Ian was right on my other side, and pizza. His smile changed, became a little more real instead of furious. How often did he smile mad? A lot. Give Signor my regards, Ian. Shall we go? I'm sure the witch can find her own way to her bed. Ian raised an eyebrow. Are you certain that's where she was headed? Yes. Ian and Drake stared at each other for a long moment, like they were communicating all kinds of secret dark messages. It gave me a headache. Or maybe that was everything else going on. I needed to get back to my room before I completely forgot the thing, something about a car in a field. Why was that important? I couldn't remember that either. Drake put a hand on my shoulder. Viney is looking for you. Do you know how to get back to your dorm? You are walking in the wrong direction. I froze under his touch while my heart pounded and the scent of black cherry enveloped me. His fingers made my skin beneath the layers of cloak and dress break out into goosebumps. It took me a minute to get my words together. Point me in the right direction. I'll go by the light of the stars. His stars on his cheek flickered, and I noticed him glancing at the corners of my eyes where I might have traitorous tear streaks. I pulled away from him, his hand falling between us. Ian coughed. I suddenly remember an incredibly important thing I left somewhere else. I'll leave you in Drake's capable hands and hope to see you another time." He turned and moved quickly away from me, disappearing into the shadows. Drake stared at me, his gaze seeming to see way too clearly in spite of the dark. "Why were you crying? Did Ian hurt you?" I laughed and smoothed my hair back. I wasn't crying. I was just staring at the stars for too long, and my eyes started to water. No, for the third worst mage in the world, he wasn't bad at all. I'm a little bit disappointed. He exhaled sharply. If Ian's the third worst, who is the absolute worst? You, but you're only the second most beautiful. I would expect a direct correlation between horribleness and beauty, but apparently not. He smiled at me and put a hand to his chin. Ian's more beautiful than me. That's a matter of debate. No, Theodore Prince. Drake's expression became enlightened and he nodded. That's true. No one is prettier than Teddy. He's vile, though. Second worst mage. Drake glanced over at me. Ian is too generous giving me that distinction. You really didn't enjoy the tourney. Didn't find him impressive? He is very popular with girls before they get to know him better. I licked my lips. When I thought back on the fight, I could only see Drake dressed in green light, extremely body-conscious green liquid light, and his movement fierce and ferocious, while Ian's were just a tad bland in comparison. He stumbled in his second pass, going for the showy impact instead of a neater, cleaner, and more effective strike. He half choked, half laughed. "Penny Lane! That's what you noticed!" "What about me?" "What do you think about my position as chemist captain? Do I deserve it?" I studied his dark boots, leather that laced over his dark jeans. When my eyes continued the natural progress up his legs, I jerked them up to his face. "Your knee wasn't aligned correctly." He frowned, leaning closer to me. "My knee was out of alignment. Show me." I stared at him, unable to look away from those eyes. "Well, when you take your position, bent leg." I trailed off as he took my hand and put it down on his leg, right above his knee. The texture of the denim rough under my fingers, but I could feel the contours of his thigh beneath the fabric. "Show me." I breathed shallowly while I pressed down, putting my hands on his hips to turn them in the right direction, refusing to look at his face, to do anything other than make his knee perfect. It wasn't a big deal. It was just like Pa to do. "If you have your knee cocked, it's going to be dislocated if struck from here." I thumped my fist lightly against the inside and his knee buckled. He tumbled over on top of me, knocking the breath out of me, his heavy body pressing me down. I couldn't breathe, but it took a few seconds to know if it was from his weight and impact or just because I was that stupid about him. He shifted and weight spread through my right ribs. I gasped and cried out, struggling out from under him. He rolled off me while I curled into a ball for a few agonizing breaths. I forced myself to kneel, sitting up straight while I covered my ribs with my palms, then pressed down sharply at just the right angle until they popped back into place. I smiled at Drake and started giggling. "Are you all right?" "My ribs." I gasped, but at least I could breathe. The pain had helped clear my head after having Drake on top of me and seeing him fight in the tourney. Finey was right. Seeing Drake like that was completely mind-melting. They're my weakness. I could never be a great wrestler. "What was that?" "I did not hit your knee hard enough to knock you over." He cleared his throat before he grinned at me, sinking down in a cross-legged position. I was dizzy from shock at having such helpful critique from my lollipop lover. "Do you have any more excellent advice you're holding back?" "Don't worry, I can take it." The way he said that, leaning forward and staring at me with those glittering green eyes, I had a hard time drawing a steady breath. I stammered for a moment. "I don't have a lot of critique to offer. It was really well choreographed and the lights were unbelievable." His grin widened. You liked my lights and my choreography. Why, thank you, Penny Lane. Of course it wasn't choreographed. That was a real fight. And I won. His voice had a hard edge to it, anger and hunger. I took a deep breath and stood up. Of course. I don't know anything about it. I've never seen that kind of thing before. Don't you need to go and celebrate with your enemy? He stood smoothly and followed, keeping only a hand's width between us. Ian is a friend of mine. I've fought with him more times than against him. Why are you letting him close to you? Surely Vines told you that he's not nice to women. I crossed my arms and dug in my heels. And you are? He leaned close, brushing my cheek with his, the green light feeling like warm, dry water lapping on my skin. I could be so nice if you'd let me, Penny Lane. I'd rub your feet until you scream and writhe from ticklishness. I'd lick your fingers until I have licked up all the sugar soaked into your skin from years of lollipop experiments. He moved closer until his warmth was against me, filled with this kinetic energy that I ached to devour. If you want me, all you have to do is say the word. I opened my mouth and closed it. He was lying. He didn't like people who wanted him. The only reason he was playing this game with me is because I was trying to stay focused on Zach, who I was going to marry even if he was a blue light-wearing mage who was obsessed with a figment of his imagination. Want you for what? I guess you are pretty useful sometimes, like hanging swings and doing laundry and helping with turnout. And helping me not to throw up after car rides. Okay. Yeah, you're kind of the most useful person I've ever met. That's valid, but I want someone nice. I know it's stupid because mages aren't nice. I know that, but it's what I want, not you. Sorry. You were not impressed by the show. His voice was flat, emotionless, but there may have been a tinge of rage to it that I didn't want to understand. Oh, I was. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever imagined, much less seen. You're amazingly talented in so many ways. But I can't want the worst mage in the world, or the second worst, or even the third. I'm sorry. We can be friends, okay? I'll see you later. Have fun with Ian. I hope you don't have a bar fight without me. I've never been to a bar fight. He smiled, showing sharp, dangerous teeth. Wow. Maybe someday you'll meet the perfect mage, one who takes you to bar fights, but somehow manages not to hurt anyone at them. He stepped closer to me and I stepped back. I was done holding my ground. Good night, Drake. I turned and ran, but hadn't gotten 2 steps before he grabbed my arm and swung me around. I stared up at him, his arms around me strong and burning. You're going in the wrong direction. That's the way to the woods. He closed his eyes, bent his head, nose against my hair, and inhaled deeply. If you were half as delicious, you'd still be irresistible. Run quickly, and I'll try not to chase you. He let me go, pushed me in the right direction, and I ran, lifting up my skirt while my cloak and hair billowed behind me. When he howled, I almost looked over my shoulder, but kept my feet moving away from him, chest aching, body protesting. I wanted those arms around me, and I never wanted him to let go. I'd lied. Of course I wanted the worst mage in the world, just like my mother, just like Poppy. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 31. Which? My room, my bed, my blanket over my head. Senior Mort snuggled into my neck while I closed my eyes tight, ignoring Viney pounding on my door. I'm sleeping, I finally yelled, and she was quiet after that. I wasn't, though. Not really. Who could sleep after their whole insides have been jiggled and dumped out, then poured back inside in any random order? I threw my blankets back and sat up. My hands were still shaking from unspent energy, the kind that needed an outlet. I put my bare legs over the side of the bed, sending it rocking. I slid to the floor and pulled my computer out of my bag, sat down at the tea party table, and logged into a site I hadn't been to in almost a year. The icon blinked, showing that I had over 800 comments awaiting moderation. That was not what I was in the mood for. I checked the last order that I'd agreed to fill and hadn't. 3 finest balls. I double-checked the size and went to my trunks. I had all the ingredients to make them. The coloring, the dusting, the flickering flare, the perfect end to a good fight. First, I had to blow the balls out of the elastic earthen putty, which meant kneading and rolling and beating, which I enjoyed a lot. It helped to focus my mind and relax my body. I added the colored swirls to the thin membrane before I lit my burner and put in my drops of clear finisher. Chemistry. If only class was a little more relevant than memorizing some table that didn't even have all the ingredients I used. By the time I had the balls blown, they were a clear, slightly colored swirl of green and pink. I blew 5 of them, then moved to the insides. I filled the injection stick with layers of sparks and ashes with a fine filling of fire before I carefully pricked the balls, injected the filler, and then rolled the ball between my heavily gloved fingers, kneading it back into place. It would have to cure for hours before they could be shipped without exploding on the way. It was already afternoon when I peeled off my gloves and goggles and stared at Senior Mort, curled on my pillow. I did not want to sleep. I did not want to think. I turned to my trunks, pulled out some emergency meal bars, ate breakfast, and went back to work. I put on my headphones, listened to Chinese soap opera, and started working on my best-selling beauty products. When I was finally tired, truly tired, I opened my computer, went to the special delivery service, ordered one for the next morning, and then back to that site with all the unread comments and marked the sale. Delivery scheduled. I took a long bath, washed my hair, and went to bed. I woke up with my phone beeping, my clock showing the time 4:30 a.m. I checked the text and read, "Pickup available for fragile parcel at Northeast Loading Dock." Wherever that was. Northeast at school, that would be 2 buildings from where I was, towards the polo field. I didn't reply because the text disappeared without leaving a number. I got dressed in my school uniform hastily, my hair once more curly as I carefully picked up the parcels in my bag, then opened my door. Zach was sleeping on the couch, one of his legs on the floor while the video game screen flickered, a control still in his hands. I hesitated and pulled the blanket over his shoulder before I continued on my way out. I hurried along the empty corridor until I crossed a large driveway, then through a covered columned walkway until I reached the northeast corner of school. No one was parked anywhere I could see, so I stepped off the walkway and headed down the drive beside the tall brick building. The windows were smaller and closer together. The further I walked from the main drive, like smaller quarters were inside the building than in the glorious elevated halls of school. Was this maintenance and housekeeping? I always liked those kinds of people. If Drake were a normal person who could hang a swing and do laundry, I wouldn't be able to resist him. A building jutted out, like a garage or something, and when I went around it, a brown delivery truck was waiting for me. I stopped walking while I stared at that truck, feeling my heart pound for no reason. It's not like my old crush would actually be here. Cara mia, is that Penny Lane? It couldn't be with those strawberry curls? I searched the shadows between the building and saw the delivery man leaning against the corner, his deep-set eyes mostly hidden beneath the fall of coal-black hair. I dropped my bag and package, then ran, my feet pounding on the ground before I threw myself at him. He didn't fall back at the impact, and when I wrapped my arms around him, he hesitated only for a moment before he laughed and wrapped his arms around me, swinging me around like I was still 11 years old. When he put me down, I stared at him before I pulled back and punched him in the shoulder. He winced. Ache. Goldilocks still hits like a witch. I grabbed the lapel of his stained and somewhat unsavory-looking jacket. You just disappeared. I shook him, but he was fairly solid and only tilted his lips slightly. Not at all. I went back to Darkside for a wedding, and when I returned, I had a replacement. It happens in the delivery business. He shrugged while my heart ached. I yanked his lapel closer, staring into his black, beady eyes before I let him go and turned away, crossing my arms over my chest. I was acting like a child. Congratulations on the marriage. He laughed and shook his head. Ah, cara mia, who would marry this ugly face? It was my cousin, a handsome, strapping lad, if ever there was one married a girl with the largest dowry I've ever seen. He wiggled his eyebrows. Right, that's my job. His lips twisted. Ah, the boys at this school, they're your peers. So you must be here hunting for a husband. Have you picked one yet? I winced because I'd talked to the delivery man far too much over the years, telling him all about my grandmama's will before I knew that deliverymen get transferred without informing any of their customers. He'd slipped into the Italianesque language we'd crafted together, Italian roots. But mostly words I'd made up. Poppy hadn't ever approved of my friendship with Signor Ludi. She hated the way he looked at her without blinking, his eyes beneath jutting brows that were cleft and swelling, marked and pocked. The first time I'd seen him, 8 or so, I'd come out to sign for the package, and when I took the clipboard, he covered my forearms with his hands, rough, calloused skin, and made the hurt less. I'd looked at him and seen the hurt in his face, so I'd put my hands over his cheek and took it out of him. It was only fair. He cocked his head, and I realized I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying, asking about the contents of the package. I told him that it was a package of finis in green and pink. When is your birthday? He asked in our secret language. Not until spring. I have ages to find a peer. I wrinkled my nose. The language felt strange on my tongue. I don't have anything to give you to drink. He smiled slightly, the curve of his lips out of place in his deformed face. I beamed back at him because his smile was beautiful to me. I tugged on his long hair. You need a trim, and you're out of uniform. Do you remember teaching me to dance? It did absolutely no good. At this school, everyone is a ballerina, and a horseman, and a linguist, and a genius. I wrapped my arms around him for another hug, because I needed one or I would burst into tears or something. I'd forgotten how it felt to have a friend. A real person I didn't have to pretend with. He patted my back and murmured words I didn't understand, but they made me feel better anyway. Finally, he pulled back and studied my face carefully before he said, You aren't too lonely, though, are you? You have more people to talk to than Senor Mort. I nodded. I do have some friends, I think, but it's hard to tell. I keep waiting for someone to light my hair on fire. He laughed, a growly sound that lacked any of the mesmerizing beauty of Drake's laugh. Of course it did. Drake and Signora Ludi were complete opposites. There must be someone that you wouldn't mind lighting you on fire. I pushed away from him and smoothed down my jacket and skirt. I'm not here for that, literally or figuratively. He brushed my cheek with his rough fingers. You are blushing. Is he a peer, an appropriate match for my Karamia? I rolled my eyes and crossed my arms. You are much too anxious to marry me off. I told you that I'm going to marry you. His smile curled tighter. My Karamia needs someone young and bold, someone like that gentleman over there. He gestured behind me, and I whirled around to see Drake, in the dim morning light, seem to unfold from the shadows. Signor Ludi called out to him with a wave, speaking in a different language, a guttural tongue full of curled lips and soft hisses. The last time I'd heard that language was the last time I'd seen Signor Ludi. Drake walked towards us a few steps before he nodded like a regal prince and responded in that same stomach-wrenching language. I'd been sitting in the small enclosed porch, refilling Signore Ludi's glass when Revere had stalked in. his dark eyes like carved pieces of stone glinting. I had spilled the golden liquid onto the table, and the deliveryman covered my hand with his, writing the bottle. Whatever Revere said to Signor Ludi. I'd never know, but I could smell smoke, dust, and something else. Something that reminded me of pain when Revere turned to me with a brittle smile. Penny, show your friend your scars. It's bad manners to see someone's exposed wounds and not respond in kind. I stared at him, my fingers numb beneath the pressure of Signor Ludi. I've already shown him my ribs. He helped me to adjust them, so they don't ache all the time. Revere's smile twisted into a peculiarly dangerous shape. Your back, Penny. Show him your back. I gasped and blinked in Drake's perfect face, a slightly derisive expression on it. I stepped forward, throwing my arms wide like I could protect Signor Ludi from Drake and the rest of the world. What are you doing here? What did you say? Signor Ludi cleared his throat behind me before he pulled my arms down and moved me to the side. I told him I saw him in Darkside as the devil's advocate. It's a kind of errand boy position. Isn't that right, young master? Signor swept a bow that seemed mocking with his misshapen shoulder, although it looked better than it had the first time I'd seen him. The last time as well. Drake cleared his throat. I'm sorry to interrupt. Penny, can I have a word? I need to be on my way. Do you have your parcels for me, cara mia? I nodded and went over to my bag and the packages I'd dropped so carelessly. I had a lot of beauty goods to send, as well as that one particular package. The one that had brought Signor Ludi. Can you take these as well? I asked in our language. They're only lotions and things. He nodded with a wide grin. Of course. Maybe I'll have to order some to make my face pretty enough to catch a bride. He squeezed my hand before he nodded respectfully at Drake and climbed into the brown delivery truck and drove away. Drake shook his head, a forced smile on his supple lips. My fingers tingled and I edged away from him to pick up my bag and put it over my shoulder. Are you all right? I frowned at him. Of course. He hesitated, glanced after the large truck and back to me. I thought you made up your delivery man. He's very interesting. My heart pounded in my chest and my back seemed to burn. Scars. I had enough of them. Drake should have looked normal, ordinary in the light of day, but I could still feel his weight on me in the light of day, but I could still feel his weight on me in the field beneath the stars, still see him with his bare muscles straining against Ian. We're friends. I mean, we're barely acquaintances. I need to get to class. He grabbed my arm as I passed and held out a muffin. I stared at him. His eyes hooded, dark in the early morning light. You didn't come out of your room all day yesterday. You have to be careful or you're going to starve to death. I inhaled shakily before I took the muffin and bit in. It was moist and sweet, with lumps of cherries and chocolate. I chewed slowly while he filled my senses. I grew hot while he leaned closer, the flavor on my tongue so much like I imagined his skin tasted. I leaned closer, feeling the pull towards him as inevitable as falling before I jerked upright. Thanks. I am starving. You need to stay back so that I don't accidentally eat you. He grinned widely and leaned even closer. You tease, but I don't think you're ever going to fulfill your promises. I held my breath while I edged away. I need to get to class. You said that. I nodded, shook my head, and then spun around, running away from him for the second time in 2 days.
Darkly Sweet, Chapter 32, Mage. I didn't think very much about it, simply stepped into Darkside for a moment, then back into Dayside on the road outside of Rosewood that wound down the mountain. I was inside the boundary where shifting of large vehicles through Darkside was forcibly prohibited. Penny's darksider would have to go through me before he left. "You're being an idiot," I mumbled, but held my position, legs apart, waiting for the screeching truck and wild-eyed darksider. The sound of the truck rumbling in the distance grew louder, but not that loud, not even when it followed the curve of the road into view. He slowed down as soon as he saw me and then pulled over in the grass before he shut off the engine. I had to walk up the road to him while he got out of the truck. His body bulky, mangled, but not too bad considering his origin. He would be considered handsome for a darksider. Some witches disliked pretty boys like myself and Ian, said we lacked character, strength, virility. I can't say how utterly heartbreaking it was to hear such slurs from the mouths of darkside witches. "What can I do for you?" His voice was even, well modulated, his eyes bright with intelligence and amusement. Lovely, he found me amusing. I want to see what packages she had delivered. He raised his eyebrows and smiled wider. "I guarantee privacy to my clients. I'm sure you understand." I stared at him. He sounded so sane and rational. I rubbed my chin. "I'm always looking for reliable transporters. Would you be interested in a very well-paying job?" He barked a laugh, his lips curling over very nice teeth. "I have more work than I can handle. Thanks all the same. They come with extremely good benefits." His eyebrows quirked. "Oh, the irresistible Huntsman offer of sanity in exchange for services. I'm not in the market for sanity just now." I stared at him. "I can see that. Penny told me about you, all about her exotic deliverman whom she gave whiskey to in exchange for ghost stories." His smile faded. "I see." I struggled not to clench my jaw, to stay calm, rational, at least as sane as this darksider. "Do you?" He shook his head. "Penny is—" I waited, pressing my palms against the sides of my pants, staying very still and calm. "I can't discuss my clients. You understand." I took a step forward, arms swinging up and bringing green flame swords to life in my hands. They sparked and sizzled from the strength of my irritation. He cocked his head. "You do not wish to fight me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I do." He smiled a little bit, a dark smile of near anticipation before he shook his head with regret. "You see, I am her friend. She needs friends. She values relationships with people, witches, mages, even weasels and rabbits. I am not going to hurt you because you are her friend and hurting you would hurt her. I do not hurt Penny Lane in any way. Do you understand?" I gritted my teeth and with a hiss put out the fire swords. "You won't fight me. You'll stand there and let me slaughter you, and then Penny will know that I'm a brutal beast. You play dirty even for a darksider." He laughed, shaking his head like this was extremely amusing to him. "I do," he finally said when his chuckle subsided. "I play very dirty. Did you want anything else? A package delivered, perhaps? The first one is free. And subsequent ones. What does Penny pay you for her deliveries?" I didn't notice any money changing hands. His smile became tight. "I do not discuss clients." I nodded. "Oh, right, I forgot. If I'm your client, will you give me hugs and swing me around too, because I've always wanted to be petted by a darksider?" His smile stayed on his ugly face, solid, immovable. "If you would like." I laughed. "A darksider with a sense of humor. You must have a very peculiar sense of humor if you like Penny Lane. Maybe you're the one who gave it to her. Do the two of you watch telenovelas together as well?" He sighed. "Does she still enjoy those? I don't think those were the exact influence her personality required. What influence do you think someone like Penny Lane needs?" He studied me, walking forward until we were only 2 feet apart, then walked around me, inhaling deeply like he was smelling me. How darksiders even had a sense of smell after living in darkside, I had no idea. He came to stop in front of me and put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was heavy, like it was made of rocks instead of flesh. "Penny Lane requires affection, protection, and imagination. She's beautiful." He cocked his head as though that was strange, pulling his hand off my shoulder and sniffing his fingers. "Ridiculous, infuriating, a monkey that will pull your hair as she rides on your back. Dangerous, so full of craving, aching, needing to be adored that I'm not sure she will ever be satisfied. You say that she needs love. A witch?" He studied me for a long time. "You are not ideal," he finally said, his brows lowering. Excuse me? I thought you said that you weren't going to. He attacked, a simple strike at my throat that bounced off my shield. Being around Penny, I almost forgot that I had one. His other hand swirled a complex pattern that weakened my shield while he struck me again, grabbing my throat in his enormous hand. I stood there with his hand around my throat. I'm not exactly a pacifist, but he'd brought up a very good point. This Darksider was Penny Lane's friend. She'd told me about him when she'd been rambling on in the grip of the fear, the curse. She hadn't been nearly as sick since then. Maybe it had to do with all the spells I put on her as we drove. Maybe she was getting used to it from prolonged exposure. Or maybe it had something to do with holding my hand, pulling my energy into her. Comfort, taken and given. I let him choke me until the edges of my vision went dark. Finally, he dropped his hand and crossed his arms over his chest, peering at me. Avarice, violence, greed, and those eyes, the green in them like the rising of heliotrope in the east. He studied me for a long while before he finally nodded tersely. If she chooses you, we'll have to make the most of it. There are advantages to being green. He said that last with a sly smile before he stepped away from me. He dusted his hands on his pants as though my immaculate skin might contaminate his dark-side fingers, fingers he'd touched Penny with, sliding them through her golden strands when she didn't notice. You don't want her. I'm not a dragon that collects pretty objects. I'm a deliverman. My business is arranging and fulfilling the needs of others. I frowned at him. You do want her. He continued towards his truck. I stood there watching him go, filled with the strangest mix of anxiety and relief. He wasn't claiming her even though he'd known her longer and she clearly preferred him over me. Why didn't he claim her, take her to Darkside as his bride? If she was an aberration, she was priceless, but perhaps he didn't have the resources to protect her. A witch who could love. Whatever else I was, I had the resources to protect a precious commodity. Whether or not I had the capacity to love her, I couldn't say.
Darkly Sweet, Chapter 33. Witch. By the time I got to English class, I was out of breath, and my heart pounded hard in my chest. Signor had picked up my delivery, the first delivery of its kind I'd made in so long. What were the odds of that happening? I sat through the class in a daze, not hearing the teacher or noticing when class was over until Whit came over and sat on my desk. Penny, what did you think of the chemistry captain on Saturday night? Is Drake finally living up to his reputation? She glanced at a straight-haired brunette, and they shared malicious smiles, although the other girl looked a little bit sick. Yeah, he's pretty awesome. I've got to get to class. I started to stand, but Whit pushed me back down, her arm strong, firm. She leaned back, tossed her hair, and pursed her luscious lips. I feel like you're at a disadvantage from being the new girl and not understanding the history. The dynamic of someone like Drake Huntsman. I think that you're going to take his interest personally instead of for what it really is. I unwrapped a lollipop and put it in my mouth. I'm sorry. What personal interest? Her smile grew tighter while I stared at her with large, dewy eyes. Drake's sudden fame in freshman year was unexpected. We were all surprised. I was dating Ian at the time. We go way back. After we broke up, I went out with Drake, but it turns out he didn't like being with just one girl. In fact, he had girls lined up begging to give him whatever he wanted. So why be with just one girl, even a girl like me? She leaned over me like a vulture about to peck out my face. Do you know what someone like Drake does with girls? My stomach tightened and I gripped the edge of the desk but didn't answer. I didn't like her being so close. I didn't like the look on her face or the way that anger poured off her, anger and something else, something thick and cloying. I swallowed while nausea swirled in my stomach. I shook my head. It's none of my business. She shrugged, her perfectly tailored little jacket over her clearly overwhelming assets. It wouldn't be anyone's business except that he likes to publicly objectify the poor things so everyone can be entertained by Drake's special treat. Girls will do anything to prove their love to someone like him. I bolted out of my chair and barely made it to the garbage can before I threw up. I heard Wit and her friend laughing as they left me to it. I staggered upright and went straight to my room. This day wasn't going to happen. When I got to Lilac Stories, Professor Vale was coming out. "Why aren't you in class?" I threw up in English. "I'm sick. I need to lay down and never, ever get out of bed again." She put her hand on my shoulder and steered me into my room. Once there, she checked my temperature, looked in my mouth, eyes felt my neck, and then shook her head. "It's not a communicable illness, but you do seem exhausted and dehydrated. I'm going to bring you soup for lunch, but try to rest now." I nodded and waited until she brought me a glass of water. After she left, I took off my uniform, put on my robe, and snuggled with Signor Mort. That's what he was waiting for, me to love him so much that I would do anything for him, publicly, ruining any chance I ever had with a nice mage if I could find one of those. I groaned and rolled over, burying my face in my pillow. I woke up to knocking on my door. It wasn't loud, but it went on and on and on until I groaned and rolled out of bed. It must be Professor Vale and the soup. I was so hungry I was going to eat Senior Mort. Fur and all if I didn't eat something else. My stomach lurched. I took a deep breath and swung open the door with a wide smile, then froze when I saw Zach holding a tray of soup and breadsticks. I chewed on my lip as I stared at the boy who was in love with a poster. The boy I'd decided to marry before I knew him. "Penny, are you feeling better?" I smiled at him sickly and backed up while he came through the door, arranging the tray on my table. "I am starving. Thanks so much for bringing food. Will you taste it for me?" He smiled at me, a nice smile that crinkled his eyes while he dipped his fingers in the soup and popped a carrot in his mouth. "Very healthy. Maybe I shouldn't mention it when you're sick. But the other night when I was with Drake and Ian, they knocked over a candy store and I brought back a bunch of stuff for you. You have to watch out for glass, though." He frowned slightly while I sat down and ate. It was finished too soon, and then my breadsticks were too. Wait, what? You knocked over a candy store?" He shook his head. "I think that Ian threw Drake through the window. While we were there, I thought of you and—" "You stole candy? That's so sweet if completely wrong." He shook his head. "Oh, we paid for it along with the rest of the damages. We always pay for it. Drake will split the bill 3 ways like usual." Drake. I bent over the table and put my head in the soup bowl, moaning. "Hey, are you really sick?" Zach put his hand on my shoulder, and I took my face out of the soup bowl and laid it on his shoulder instead. "Zach, have you seen what Drake makes girls do in public?" He stiffened. What?" "I hate men. They're so disgusting." "Did Ian? Did Drake?" I shook my head vehemently, still buried in his shirt. No, 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 no." He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "Drake was really worried about you yesterday when you didn't come out of your room all day. We all were. If you were sick, you should have told someone so we could bring you soup. Professor Vale insisted that you just needed some time alone." I lifted my head slowly as I stared at Zach, who was pathetic for loving a poster, but probably not as pathetic as me, who felt irrationally betrayed by something Drake may or may not have done years ago. That's what the sickness was, me thinking of Drake with other girls even though I already knew that Drake was that kind of person. Drake was the irresistible type who ruined women. Big surprise. Of course, if he was the type to do that. What was going to stop him from informing the school about Signor Ludi? Maybe get him in trouble and keep me from seeing him again just for fun. I chewed on my lip. "How was your drunken spree? Did you have a bar fight? Did someone smash a chair over someone's head? I always wanted to see that." He smiled slightly as he rubbed my forehead with his finger. You have soup. He stuck it in his mouth, and I saw Drake's teeth, his smile, him sucking on my fingers as he made a scene in public, just because he could. I swallowed and rubbed my forehead with the back of my hand. Sorry, I think I got it on your shirt. He smiled and shrugged. Not a big deal. No, I don't think we smashed any chairs. If you ever come along, I'll make sure to smash all the chairs. I nodded and lay over on the table, head on my arm. Zach, don't you have classes? It's lunch, and after lunch I'm supposed to be your writing tutor, so I don't have anywhere to be. I stared at him. Do you have any easy video games that I could play? He grinned widely. I have my old Nintendo Ds and all my old games. They're classics. I'll set it up for you. I followed him out of my room after putting Senior Mort back in his cage, and then realized that I wasn't wearing very much. I grabbed a quilt off the bed, all tangled vines and voluptuous roses, and wrapped it around the robe that liked to fall off my shoulders before I went out and sat on the couch. He sat beside me and showed me how the controllers worked, and explained that the goal was to squash mushrooms and collect gold coins. It was fairly straightforward, and he just sat there telling me what to do, gesturing kind of wildly when I was supposed to jump over the abyss, then throwing himself back in anguish when I fell to my death. I giggled because he was as dramatic about Luigi as I was about telenovelas. I played video games after Zach left me to go to his afternoon classes, and then fell asleep because apparently I really was sick and not just nauseous from the Drake thing. That made me feel slightly better because it was ridiculous for me to care at all, not to mention have a physical reaction like that. I woke up when Zach took the controller out of my hands. I stretched and sat up, almost feeling better. I caught Zach's hand. Thanks, Zach, for a guy in love with a poster. You have a lot of compassion. He sighed. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to go on and on about her the other night. I'm such a loser. I laughed. She's a cool poster, Zach. No shame. Let your freak flag fly, isn't that it? He perched on the edge of the couch and leaned over to me. Do you really not mind me talking about it? It drives Viney insane. I shrugged. I'm already insane. He licked his lips and leaned closer, like he was about to reveal state secrets. Pitch hasn't been heard of or seen for over a year. She just disappeared without a trace, and her alchemist stopped supplying around that same time. But recently, someone received an order they made with Pitch's supplier, so there's a buzz that maybe Pitch is back, or maybe not. I don't want to get all crazy for nothing, but it seems strange that Pitch's alchemist would be working again if Pitch wasn't coming back. What do you think? I stared at him while I tried to process this new development. Zach was totally mental. I smiled at him and patted his shoulder. Wow, that's really exciting. Can you contact the supplier directly to find out if they're still working with Pitch, or if she left the country or something? He sighed. It's like a black hole. Pitch black. He gave me a dirty look while I tried not to giggle. The supplier is incredibly particular about the kinds of herders he supplies, and the only link we actually have between him and Pitch is that he makes what she uses, and no one else makes herders exactly like that. Ooh, maybe the supplier and Pitch are secret lovers. But there's some kind of obstacle, a curse or a secret, maybe a dead body. They had to go underground to be together. But then their love child needs an operation, so the supplier has to have some quick cash. Meanwhile, the mafia is tracking their movements, and their only hope is in black market hearts for the baby. He stared at me flatly before he grinned. He pushed my shoulder, knocking me back into the couch. That's probably what I sound like to Viney. I rubbed my shoulder. Be gentle with me, Zach. You have to remember that you're a blue ninja and must use your superpowers for good and not evil. I'm sorry. He rubbed my shoulder a little bit before he froze, his arm still on me. Did Ian really walk with you after the tourney? I shifted uncomfortably and patted his hand. Weird, right? It was weird. It all started with the jeans, and then everything else. Drake in green liquid light. I scowled at the blanket before I took a deep breath. Classes are over? I don't even know what time it is. Do you know where Drake is? Polo practice. I winced. Awesome. When does that end? Let me check my Drake calendar. He rolled his eyes. Viney slammed in the door, glaring at me. Are you still sick? I shrugged. Zach pointed at her. She would know. When does Drake finish with polo practice? She narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously. 5:45. Why? He shrugged and pointed at me. Viney is a walking, talking Drake calendar. She stalks Drake like I stalk Pitch. It makes us very empathetic. It's really too bad that you can't obsess with someone untouchable. It would make our threesome complete. Viney leaned over the couch to peer into my eyes, stopping 2 inches away from my nose. I stared at her, smelling tiramisu on her breath. Hi, Viney. You want to go see Drake? That's weird. She put her hand on my forehead. I pushed it off and scooted away from her. It's not weird. I need to talk to him. I don't want to see him. But I need to. I forgot something this morning, and I have to get it back. This morning? She looked so suspicious. I ran into Drake before classes. He gave me a muffin. Maybe the muffin was poisoned, and that's why I'm sick. Zach shook his head. Drake made the muffins himself, and I ate 5. Chocolate black cherry? I nodded and felt my stomach lurch. Drake shouldn't be making me muffins when he was so vile. Also, if he did make them, he shouldn't give any of them to Zach instead of me. Let's play video games until Penny has to go stalk Drake, Viney said, picking up a controller. What is this? Are you serious? She made a face, but it didn't keep her from pushing start. They did a 2-player game, and Zach was as hilarious to watch as Viney. I sat between them looking from one to the other while they bluffed and blustered, howled and screeched. Professor Vale came in with more soup. I thanked her and ate while pointing out the dangerous bad guy that Zach clearly saw. It was fun, and when I'd finished my soup, Viney turned to me and nodded seriously. You need to hurry if you're going to catch him between his shower and dinner. Do you want me to come with you? I can show you where to watch for him. Zach whacked her shoulder. Shameless, Viney. You're going to freak her out. Already freaked. No thanks, Viney. It will only take a few minutes. I got dressed in a short skirt and cute pink blouse before I waved goodbye and headed to the polo field. I wasn't really up for it. Not the way girls stared at me and whispered not so quietly about Pukey Penny. I smiled and tried to communicate my willingness to go all Penny Pukey on them, which seemed to work rather well. Or they thought they'd catch my bug. Anyway, I made it to the polo field, but I felt drained and my hands trembled while I waited by the fence. A guy rode by on his stud, pulled up his horse and whirled it around towards me. I thought he'd trample me, but he pulled up right in front of me, his horse pawing and snorting while he smiled. Are you looking for Drake? I nodded while my heart pounded and I pressed myself away from the horse. The guy looked familiar, but he only whirled back around on his horse and pounded away into the stable. I swallowed down nausea and fought the urge to leave. I took 5 steps away, then forced myself back, walked away, and forced myself back. It was pacing, and it was perfectly respectable. Drake came up to me on his prancing horse, sliding down beside me before I could run away screaming. Penny, shouldn't you be in bed? I stared at him. The last time he'd talked about me being in bed was at night with a star on his face. I swallowed and forced a smile. Actually, I wondered if I could talk to you. Of course. I smell horrible. If you'd like to wait until I shower, we can go into dinner together. I put up my hands, fending off that idea. My mouth watered at his horrible smell, because the scent of dark cherries was stronger than ever, and his cheek had a streak of dirt on it. I reached up and rubbed it without thinking. The contact shocked me in him, his eyes widening and showing green while I froze, hand still on his cheek. You have some dirt. I pulled my fingers away while he smiled all the way to his eyes. I do, a lot. Is that what you wanted to talk about? It's a fascinating topic. I exhaled and chewed on my lower lip. This was going to be awkward. This morning you saw me with Signore Ludi. He nodded. I remember. He's a friendly acquaintance of yours. I frowned and nodded. Drake, I'm not very good at begging or blackmail. Is there anything that you want that I can give you to keep you from talking about what you saw? He stepped closer, putting his hand on my forehead and peering into my eyes. I pushed him away. Everyone already did that. This isn't a feverish moment. At least I don't think it is. Don't you want to throw up when I touch you? I stared at him. Not any more than usual. Drake, I'm serious. The last time I saw Signor, he had a thing with Revere, and I know that he says he went to a wedding. But Revere was always getting rid of anyone I got too close to, anyone I got too friendly with. So I think it's pretty much impossible that Revere wasn't involved with my only friend in the world leaving and not coming back. I know it looked a little bit affectionate. I shrugged and nodded slightly. It wasn't, though. Of course not. He stared into my eyes. You came all the way here waiting for me just so you could ask me not to tell your stepfather about your delivery man. And you're offering me something in exchange, only you're not sure what. Within reason. Lollipops or foot rubs, nothing like. Go to the dance with me. I stared at him. The dance? He nodded. It's getting really irritating. I'll show you. He led the horse around so I could see its other side and words shaved into it. Be my prince and I'll be your princess at the fairytale dance. Corinne Bailey. Corinne Bailey, who is she? His lips thinned. She's the girl who broke into the stables and drugged my horse just so she could shave Demon without getting mauled. Stupid boy taking sugar cubes without getting a weasel to taste test them first. Signor Mort is not available. What would hurt a horse would kill him. He shook his head. Of course not. I'm talking about a different weasel like Jackson. I'm sorry to offend weasels everywhere. Anyway, will you please agree to go to the dance with me so that my horse isn't shamed again? I swallowed and nodded. He held out his hand. Shake on it? I hesitated, fighting an overwhelming feeling of falling before I put my palm against his. One dance won't hurt. He smiled at me, leaning close before I pulled away from him. I'm going to go lie down. Thanks, Drake.
Darkly Sweet, Chapter 34. So Mage. Spidley cursed Penny. The whole school buzzed with it, the curse that was designed for one purpose, potent and clear. Penny could not have me. Physically, her body would rebel at close physical proximity to me. She'd looked terrible waiting for me by the fence like a scared little mouse, but she touched me. Well, the dirt off my face, but my cheek was quite clearly beneath that dirt. If she could touch me, then her protective counterspell was holding up, doing its best to minimize the effects of Whitley's curse. I went in to dinner that night in time to see Viney confront Wit. Pathetic Wit. Can't get a guy on your own, have to take out the competition. Viney glowered at Wit, her spiked wrists crossed over her chest matching her dark spiked hair. She reminded me of a terrier about to take out a rat. The rat was sleek and oily, glistening from her eyes to her sharp teeth as she tossed her lustrous black curls. You care, why? Don't pretend that you like the stupid little tart. You should be grateful to me for putting her in her place. Jackson edged closer to Whitley, while Zack backed up Viney, his face stony. Getting between two witches was extremely stupid. Grinning broadly, I walked directly to the center of the conflict. Ladies, there's more than enough of me to go around. Viney glowered at me, while Wit smiled sharply, lips curving as she glanced up and down my body appreciatively. Sometimes Penny accidentally looked at me and blushed. "What are you doing, Drake?" Viney hissed. Being fought over, apparently. "Whitley, I have to thank you for whatever you did to Penny. She's such a charmingly contrary creature. The more I pursue her, the more she retreats, but after your encouragement, she agreed to attend the dance with me. I'm so delighted I could kiss you." Wit's face went pale and Viney smirked. Zack raised an eyebrow and gave me a skeptical glance. Jackson stood beside Wit looking kind of blank and passive. He didn't care. I studied Jackson because we still had unfinished business with the room he'd trashed. Whitley's lips curled. "She'll have a hard time dancing with you while throwing up." I smiled. "Do you think so?" Professor Vale was quite certain that she would be perfectly fine. She clenched her teeth and glared at Viney. "That's right, you need a dorm mommy to take care of you." Viney raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms over her skull t-shirt. "I think you need a dorm mother to take care of you if you can't control your cattiness. Maybe Drake would like you if you weren't so desperate." Whitley clenched her fists while I purposefully stepped in front of Viney. I smiled widely at Wit. "I like desperate women. I like all kinds of women. You're welcome to join my harem any time, Wit." I pulled a green knife out of thin air, the blade curved and delicate, like an oversized scalpel. Wit went pale, her lips twisting into a snarl before she whirled away, slinking out of the room. I put a hand on Jackson's shoulder while I made the knife vanish. "Did you eat, Jackson? Sit with me. I think we have a lot to discuss."
Darkly Sweet, Chapter 35. Witch. The next day was okay until I got into Pas de Deux, and Drake was standing there by the piano, talking to the pianist. I turned around and walked back into the dressing room. I sat on the bench and leaned over my knees. Would he really keep what he knew about Signora to himself? How could I touch him? Let him touch me when I kept having an image of girls and him and... I shook my head. I did not need to think about those things. It wasn't any of my business. I sat there until Madame came and started lecturing me in French about how if I had a headache I should at least do it with good posture, and real ladies do not make an entire class wait for them. I gave her a smile and stood up, forcing myself into the studio. I went to the end of the bar, far away from where Drake was bending and stretching. He ignored me, but I couldn't help watching him. Those muscles beneath the soft fabric. Not tights like some of the guys wore shamelessly, but I'd seen him in so much less. Felt his body on top of me, dislocating my ribs. When we moved into the center of the room, I waited for Drake to put his hands on my waist like all the other boys were doing. But instead, he stood behind me with his hands on his waist. I waited for a few minutes before I turned around. "What are you doing?" "Shh." "No talking in ballet class." His words were stern, but there was a glimmer of smile in his eyes. I turned around and stood there stupidly, waiting for another few minutes, until he finally put his hands on my waist, firm hands holding onto my sides. But instead of lifting, he just kept his hands there. 5 minutes we stood there until we moved to the next position, which was him holding my hand while I stood on tiptoe and tried to keep my leg outstretched behind me in a beautiful line. "Drake, you're killing me. I've been holding my leg in the air for 5 hours. "You exaggerate. It's only been 2. He glanced at me before he focused once more above my left shoulder. What are you? Shh. No talking in ballet class. Madame clapped her hands for emphasis, and that was the last time I tried to communicate with my partner. Fine. If he wanted to act weird, I could handle that. I could double that. The next time he took a long time grabbing my leg and lifting me above his head, I grabbed his leg and proceeded to lift it off the ground. Not him, though. No, I was not going to get him over my head, however irritated I was. He watched me blankly while his foot kept going up and up until it touched his ear. Then I put it down. Aren't you going to lift me? I rolled my eyes. He was ridiculously flexible, and his feet pointed beautifully. After class, I hurried to change, then went into the hall, only brought up short by a girl with mascara streaked down her cheeks. Are you really going to the dance with Drake? She sobbed at me. I glanced around, and the hall was filled with people still as statues, waiting for the outcome. I took a deep breath. Signor. Yes, I am. We're going as friends. She started wailing and screaming about the injustice of life while I edged around her. I glanced up and caught Drake's eye where he watched the proceedings with a great deal of satisfaction on his face. Well, fine. I was pretty satisfied myself. After the rest of my classes, including business, which I got through without actually talking to Drake, I stumbled into history to collapse beside Viney. Are you okay? Don't puke on me. I pulled out a lollipop and unwrapped it, cellophane crackling satisfyingly. No, just tired. She stared at me. Are you really going to the dance with Drake? I winced. I guess I am. I think he blackmailed me. She wrinkled her face up. I didn't think you'd want to talk to him after that whole thing with Wit, but now you're going to the dance with him. It's weird. What thing with Wit? My stomach tightened and I tasted bile. At least it wasn't black cherry. Everyone knows what Wit told you about Drake. It's... Books open, please. I opened my book and refused to look at Viney for the rest of the class. Afterwards, there was homework. Lots of it because I'd missed an entire day. I headed to study hall and got to be glared at by Oliver, who I kept picturing naked in orange lights. He paired me with another guy who was remarkably picturesque. All long brown locks and large, soft eyes, with a mouth like genocide. He looked like a telenovela star who wouldn't say much, but wouldn't have trouble seducing the entire cast anyway. He wanted to teach me Italian, which was good because I didn't know real Italian, just Ludi and our secret language. He'd lean forward and give me a definition after licking his lips and looking at me just so beneath his hooded lids. Finally, it was time to leave. I was nervous when Viney and Zach waited for me at the entrance. What were they doing there? Guys, what's going on? We're going with you to do community service. Zach smiled slightly while Viney looked in pain. Seriously? I wasn't going to go. I was sick yesterday, so I might still be contagious. Viney shook her head. Professor Vale said, You're fine. Were you studying with Lester? She made a face. What? He's gorgeous. She shot me a bewildered look. What are you talking about? He looks like a wild beast. All that hair and meat, he's like a... brooding Heathcliff. I think he's going to forget that we're speaking Italian and carry me off to some cliff with perpetual lightning storms. Zach looked at me in confusion. That's the kind of guy you like. And what's so great about perpetual lightning? Well, if I were the bride of Frankenstein, which would be cool, I would be in a constant state of perfect energy and regeneration with all the lightning. Viney groaned. So you're saying that Lester is the perfect monster to your monster bride. Now I understand you. Let's go. She grabbed my arm and hauled me along while Zach gave me a sympathetic smile. After letting her pull me down all those library steps and down the pillared hallways, I pulled away from Vinny when I saw Drake's green Suburban. I don't think. What's wrong, Penny? Are you afraid of me? Drake stood in the shadows, leaning against the car door with his muscular arms across his chest. Should I be? Yes. Yes, I should. He smiled. I promise to be on my best behavior. I'll play chauffeur while you and Viney ride in the back. And then after we do community service, we'll stop at the regular place and eat in our regular booths. How is that possible since we'd be 4 people instead of 2? He shrugged. I'll let you work that out. My point is, I'm not a threat. I mumbled under my breath. Macaroons and bonbons. But I climbed in the door he opened for me. After the ride to the hospital, I fell out of the car, eager to get away. But when Drake offered his arm, I stared at it for a moment, knowing what that gesture meant, comfort from my irrational fear of cars. That was sweet. Was there an ulterior motive that I didn't understand? I stared at him for a long time until Viney bumped me. Are we going to do something or what? We were beautiful princesses by the time the sweet little cancer patients were all done with us. Viney looked at me kind of thoughtfully as I pulled the last of a dozen hairbands out of her hair. She looked pretty horrible, like a vampire clown with spots of rouge on her cheeks and red lipstick with her usual black clothing. That wasn't too bad, she said softly. I smiled at her. I love it. That doesn't mean I want to go next week or anything, but I can kind of understand the appeal for someone like you. Someone so sweet and innocent. She actually believes it when a subterranean-like wit tells her something. Subterranean? I knew she was a secret alligator shapeshifter. It's in the eyes. She nudged me kind of hard. That's not what I'm talking about. That's good because who wants to talk about wit? Not me. Come on, let's see if Zach fainted. Zach was laughing with Drake about something by the front desk when we came up. He smiled at me and I beamed back, specifically not looking at Drake, the way he leaned so casually against the desk like he was too cool to be there when he was the one who started this whole thing. I forgot that I wasn't looking at him and smiled instead. He raised an eyebrow which was close enough to a leer that I had to run away, meaning I grabbed Viney's arm and hustled out of there with her. Do you want to sit with me or Drake? Or you could get a separate table with Zach, or a separate table without Zach. So many options. She didn't understand no matter how many times I explained it until we were actually at the restaurant and the waiter greeted us with bright smiles, 2 menus, and 2 tables. Viney leaned over the table at me. You sit at separate tables? Why? I shrugged. I don't remember. It just sort of started. And now we can't stop. Wait until you've tried the Szechuan chicken. It's incredible. Are you sure you don't want to sit at your own table? I'm sure. We ordered, and then she fixed me with her most steely, dark glare. Drake never did anything with a girl in public as graphic and shocking as you and him with the shake. I choked on my water, spitting it out all over her. She sighed and rolled her heavily lined eyes and dabbed herself. Not dinner table conversation, Viney. You're going to kill me. I spend most of my life trying to forget about that moment. She put her hands on the table, leaning closer. Wit cursed you so that you wouldn't be able to be with him. But it didn't work, just like all the other curses never stick to you. That's why girls hate you so much. Drake's acting really weird where you're concerned. I know that you came here and Drake's always, Penny, let me suck on your fingers. And Penny, let's sing horribly in the bell tower. And Penny, let's go to a dance after you eat this gingerbread house I made from scratch. But the truth is, he's actually a misogynist who completely hates women. I would suspect him of trying to get close to you just so that he can crush you, but he's exerting way too much effort. His attention span is notoriously short. Why would he go out with you every week and sit in separate booths? What could he possibly get out of that? No one understands. It makes it look as though he actually likes you. She stared at me while I gazed back blankly. Fortune cookies? She snorted. You know that's a euphemism, right? At my blank stare, she added helpfully. You, Drake, a bed. I cringed and shook my head, which made me dizzy, or the idea of Drake and a bed made me dizzy, which was possible. I had way too many issues to keep straight. In that case, it's definitely not for the fortune cookies. My cheeks were very hot as I stared at my sesame chicken. It was almost as good as the Szechuan. She snorted. When Drake asked us to come with you today so you'd feel pressured to come, I thought he'd corner you somewhere. Do you guys honestly do service? Eat separately and then go home? Every week? I shrugged and poked my food around. All this talk was making me lose my appetite. We talk. Talk? About what? I stabbed a cabbage roll. She sounded a little too interested. I don't know. Business telenovelas, whatever. She made a disgusted face. Are you telling me that Drake licking malt off you is the most that you guys have ever done? I stuffed the whole cabbage roll in my mouth and shrugged helplessly. What's wrong with you? He's willing, isn't he? Is he really just using you to make other girls jealous? That's really cruel of him. But last night, he made it very clear to Wit that her hurting you isn't going to work because the more she pushes you away, the more you want him, whatever curses she uses. I chewed slowly, but she stared at me until my mouth was empty and I had to answer. Well, Wit does affect me in horrible ways. I never know what I'm going to say to her. She narrowed her eyes at me. Did Drake really blackmail you into going to the dance with him? I frowned at her. I'm not sure. I probably shouldn't try to deal with him when I'm sick. I don't understand him at the best of times. She shook her head and looked around the room. You are so strange. You go out with Drake and don't sit and stare at him when you get the chance. I should have sat with him so I could stare at him so I could stare at him and he'd try not to notice me staring. This is crazy. I can't stare at him if I want to. Seriously. Why would you get a table and not be able to? Look at Drake. He's perfect. Those lips and cheekbones and jaw and hair and eyes and eyebrows and ears and... I covered my ears. Bonbons and macaroons are as bad as Zach. I'm trying to eat. She shrugged and then filled her mouth enough that I lowered my hands and ate my own food, but gave her a lot of suspicious glances. After we were finished and left the restaurant, the waiter waved at us enthusiastically, telling us he would see us next week and that my man had paid. Your man? Viney glanced at me while I shrugged. He's kind of funny. Did you get your fortune cookie? I winced after I'd said it, while she gave me an arch look. I hurried away from her and towards Zach and Drake where they sat on the hood, leaning on the windshield, talking about something I couldn't hear. When I got closer, I could make out the words, music levels, changing up the rotation, chemist stuff. I'm going to ride in the back with Zach, Viney announced. No, both Drake and I said at the same time, then exchanged looks, his amused, mine something a little more terrified. No. Fine. I will drive, and Zach will ride up front with me while you two ride in the back. She wiggled her eyebrows at me while I stood there feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. We haven't gotten malts yet. I will buy malts since your man paid for my dinner. Viney held out her hand to Drake until he pulled out his keys and dropped them into her hand, his expression unreadable. I should have refused, but Drake had already given Viney his keys and was looking at me like he expected me to be afraid of him. Okay. I climbed past Drake while he held the back door open for me and slid over when he followed. I stared at him in the dim interior. I feel like I just got played. I think she's going to crash your car. He took my hand in his, turning it over and brushing the skin with his thumb. It's reinforced. I think we'd be fine unless she managed to plummet off a cliff. Even then, I slid my fingers in his and squeezed tight. Not the best conversation. Not the worst, either. That title has to go to Viney. I heard that. Viney glanced over at me before she finished adjusting the rearview mirror and the seat to her height. Drake cleared his throat. What did you guys talk about? I shifted uncomfortably. Stuff. How about you and Zach? Choreography. Nice! He leaned closer, his lips brushing my cheek as he whispered, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to tell anyone about your secret mailman lover, whether or not you go to the dance with me. I shouldn't use you to keep other girls from going insane. I apologize. I stared at his hand, strong and firm around mine. Are you serious? He flashed a sharp smile at me. Yes, I withdraw my offer. I smoothed my fingertips over his hand. I don't mind if you tell people you're going with me, and then I can get sick or something at the last minute. You'd do that? I nodded before I glanced up at him. Viney was telling me that you're acting really weird about me, that you don't usually hang out with a girl unless there's some kind of fortune cookie involved. He raised an eyebrow with a slight smile. I knew I forgot something. He was so close to me, his voice a low murmur that went deliciously with the slight scent of black cherry. Fortune cookie is a euphemism for... He slid his hand over my mouth, his head still close to mine. Don't say it. Euphemisms are ruined if you say what they mean. I giggled and pulled his hand down. Fair enough. Are we okay? I stared at him, his smile disconcerting in its softness. What did okay mean when it came to the impossibly irresistible Drake Huntsman? Of course, friends. Friends. He tightened his grip while my heart pounded hard in my chest. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 36. Days passed, and I fell into the rhythm of life at Rosewood School for Crazy Rich Kids. The air grew sharper, colder in the mornings, still warm in the afternoons, but dustier, the sun fading down behind the woods in their russet glory. I leaned against a pillar in front of the library, staring at the distant trees, breathing deeply and letting my mind wander. The leaves reminded me of Drake's hair, glistening with sweat, dusty from wrestling with Zach. My fingers twitched, aching to slide through his strands, to bring order to the mess, or just enjoy the chaos. I licked my lips and unwrapped a lollipop. I didn't feel anxious, so it was raspberry sweet and slightly tart that reminded me of Zach. I walked up the steps slowly, delighted when Oscar glared at me and assigned me to Lars. Oscar shot a dirty look at my lollipop, but didn't tell me that they weren't allowed. Have you ever thought about asking Viney out? I think she likes you. I stuck my lollipop back in my mouth and watched Oscar's face turn interesting colors. Finally, he sputtered, shooing me away from the desk. Don't get any book sticky. I sighed and swished my skirt as I headed over to Lars. Lars, do you have a crush on Pitch? His eyes went kind of glassy. Her ribbon curl is... I take that as a yes. So disappointing. Will you help me pick a topic for my English paper? Afterwards, I gave him a lollipop and headed out, aware that Oscar's eyes followed me with a dangerous and deadly glare. I only dripped lollipop spit on the 500-year-old book, not the 600-year-old one. I beamed at him. Just kidding. See you later, Oscar. I headed down the hall, then at the top of the large marble stairs saw Drake running up. I hesitated before I continued down, determined to act cool and not like seeing him move. So fast, so powerfully didn't get me all stupid and flustered. He looked up and had wide eyes like he didn't like what he saw. I paused, but my feet didn't pause. They kept sliding over the marble step, while my hand slid off the railing until I was airborne. I hit Drake, then the edge of a marble step with my thigh. Then Drake again, tumbling down the stairs until we stopped, braced by Drake, jamming his foot in a banister and gripping the edge of a step with one hand, his other one behind my head. I stared at him, breathing heavily, my chest pressed against his, and in that moment, I wanted to fall down the stairs for the rest of my life, hanging onto Drake and taking all the painful bumps and bruises as long as I got to crash with him. His eyes burned into mine as I shifted on top of him and then gasped as his leg slid over my bare one. I lost focus of everything while I tightened my grip on the lapel of his suit coat, hanging on for more than dear life. His lips were so close to mine, slightly parted, soft and supple. I leaned closer to that mouth, inhaling black cherry and something else, something pungent. "Is that neem oil?" He raised his eyebrows, his breath cool on my parted lips. "I hope not. Neem will be a nightmare to get out of clothes." I nodded, and my chin bumped his while his leg shifted. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. I needed to touch him, to taste him, to feel his skin against mine. Penny? I think my grip is about to fail. I'd love to continue this conversation, maybe in my room." I opened my eyes wide and saw his eyes so close I could make out all the swirls and specks of green and black. His lips were so close to mine. Too close. I rolled off him, hitting my thigh on the marble step beneath. I smoothed down my skirt and winced as I stood up. "Are you okay?" I bent over to help him, but he stayed there lying on the step in that awkward position. I changed my mind. I can hang onto the lip of this step indefinitely. Climb back on top of me. I sighed and pulled his feet out of the railing and put them down so he could sit up. He grabbed me around the waist and pulled me onto his lap. "Drake, haven't you learned your lesson about grabbing girls? I'm going to have to bring Senior Mort to keep you in line." "Are you okay, Penny? I don't think you hit your head. But what about the rest of you? Did you sprain anything?" He ran his hands over my arms and my legs before I could stop him. I inhaled sharply when he got to my thigh, and he actually pushed my skirt up so he could look at my leg. "Drake!" I slapped his hands away while he leaned back against the steps to frown at me, where I perched on his knees. "That is going to be an ugly bruise. That's what makeup's for." His scowl deepened. Someone warned me about the steps being oiled. I almost wasn't here in time. I shrugged, but I felt cold and grabbed his hand. "You could have texted me." He tangled his fingers in mine and sat up, sliding his other hand over my waist, drawing me closer. "It's probably my fault for telling the world that you're my date for the dance. I think we should call it off." I bit my lip, then lifted my chin. "And I think we should make a big scene where you present me with some seriously adorable dance outfit and make whoever did this sick with jealousy. There it is, that vengeance coming out. Because it's probably all your fault, the fall I mean. Would you help me do my laundry tonight?" He raised his eyebrows. "I will help you do your laundry every night. You know there's nothing I like more than helping a weak, incapable woman who can't load a washing machine." He tightened his grip on me and leaned closer so he was only a breath apart from me. "What are you doing?" He smiled slightly before he pulled away. "I thought it looked like you wanted to kiss me before, but it was probably the awkward position you found attractive, not me." I licked my lips. Probably. It would be like death by weasel. He raised his eyebrows. "Kissing me would be like death by weasel?" I nodded. "Attractive in the unlikelihood. Are you going to help me with my laundry, or were you teasing?" Soon enough, we were once again alone in the laundry room, and every time I glanced at him, he seemed to be looking at me, which was ridiculous. but my whole body buzzed with an awareness of him. Every movement he made seemed to be part of me. Finally, I had a clean and folded basket of laundry, and so did he. And somehow he'd managed to get the nasty neem oil out of everything. He caught my fingers outside of the door. "Let me walk you to your room." I shook my head. "I may not be able to handle a washing machine, but I can walk all by myself." "Fine." He tightened his grip on my fingers. "Walk me to my room." I stared at him, and in spite of the 2 laundry baskets between us, I felt like I could feel his chest against mine, his heart pounding rapidly while his pupils dilated. I glanced away and nodded. "I've never been to your room." We walked slowly, 2 buildings away from Lilac Stories. But instead of having commons, it was just a wide and elegant hall with a few doors far apart, which made sense when Drake opened his door and let me into his room. It was a suite with a living room area, with kitchenette on one side, and then a few steps up was a bedroom and a bath. "Your bathroom is in your bedroom." He nodded and passed me to walk up the steps with his laundry. I stood there in his doorway watching him put away his laundry, hanging his suits in a closet with a sliding mirror door. He had a lot of glass along with the black that dripped like oil over everything. "I have a surprise for you," he said, coming down the steps to me. He took the laundry basket out of my hands and led me over to the couch. "A surprise? How exciting." "I hope it's the good kind of surprise and not the other kind, not the kind with neem oil. Like the time you threw me a tea party, not the time you held back my hair while I puked." He grinned, showing sharp, white teeth. "Penny, are you nervous? I promise I won't bite you." I hesitated, then let him slowly draw me over to the couch. He grabbed a remote, clicked at the enormous screen hanging over a fireplace, and with that flames came to life behind the glass wall. At the same time, I heard familiar music and saw my favorite characters of all time from the telenovela, Passiones. I squealed and actually jumped up and down before throwing my arms around Drake. "It's a good surprise!" I squeezed him tight, burying my face in his neck and inhaling his bewilderingly intoxicating scent before I pulled away, breathing rapidly. "Do you have a blanket? Popcorn? Come on!" I sat down on the floor in front of the couch while Drake went to get a blanket, black of course, and I wrapped it around myself, covering my nicely bruised leg. I heard popcorn popping, but I was already sucked into Lario's secret obsession with Marionetta. "Drake, hurry! He's going through her mail and he's going to see her correspondence and have a knife fight with Antonio. You're going to miss it!" He laughed and soon settled beside me with a silver bowl of fluffy popcorn. He tugged on the blanket until it covered both of us, and I curled beneath his arm against his side. I didn't think about going closer to him. Just one moment I was leaning against the couch, and the next I was leaning on Drake. He felt so nice, so right and perfect. I swallowed and somehow felt less like squealing gleefully. I glanced over at Drake, and he turned his head, smiling at me before I quickly faced front again. "Viney and Zach should be here." "You think Viney would like this?" I shrugged. "She made me watch horror. That means she can watch telenovelas, doesn't it?" "Honestly, I think she'd get addicted, and that's all you guys would ever do. It's better this way. Trust me." I leaned my head on his shoulder, then sat upright, because what was I doing getting closer to him? "Are you all right? Uncomfortable?" I turned my head to stare at him, shook my head, and then turned back to the screen. For some reason, everything made me think of Drake, lying on his body on the steps. I could practically see Marionetta in such a position with her brother-in-law, Hester, because they were always accidentally getting into those kinds of positions. She wouldn't snuggle under a blanket with him, though. That wasn't an accident. What was I doing so close to Drake when it wasn't an accident? I couldn't be so close to him, not when my body was so stupid about him. Not when my mind shut off when he brushed his fingers over my skin. Finally, the show ended and I shot up, grabbing my laundry basket. "That was so amazing! I can't believe you let me watch that. You're so sweet. I've got to get to bed. See you tomorrow, buddy. He grinned at me while he stood, folding the blanket into neat thirds before draping it over the black couch. I'll walk back with you. That's silly. I just walked here with you. If you walk back with me, then I'll have to walk back with you. And then you'll have to walk back with me. And it could take all night. He tugged the laundry basket. I held on for a second, but then let go when the laundry bounced alarmingly. I would hate to fold it all over again. Do you have a lotion for bruises that I could put on my back? I hid it on the stairs. I sighed. Oh, of course, that's a good idea. We walked back, but I walked fast that time, like hounds were chasing me. Finally, we got back to my room, and I did my code and hand scan, then let Drake in with my laundry basket. I rummaged around for the right lotion and then turned back to Drake. I held it out to him, but instead he grabbed the hem of his shirt and pulled it up, over his rippling abdominals, rounded pectorals, sharp collarbones, and over his head. I stared at him while my mouth watered and I almost dropped the lotion out of my limp fingers. Can you put it on me? He gave me what may have passed for a demure smile on anyone else, then turned and showed me his back. I hissed when I saw the raised welt that ran down his left trapezius. I unscrewed the lid and smoothed the lotion on, barely noticing the soft skin, the silk covering rock-hard muscles, starting at his shoulder blade and working down to his hip. I rubbed and rubbed, way more than was necessary, but I couldn't seem to stop touching him, stop stroking and sliding my hands up and down his back until he turned around, pulling the lotion out of my hands. My turn. He nudged me into a chair with the elaborate rose carvings, and then started on my leg, at the knee smoothing lotion over the skin in circular patterns, working with his thumbs over the tight muscles, up and up, until he was at the edge of my skirt. My breath caught while he hesitated at that flimsy barrier until he slid his thumbs beneath the edge and worked up my outer thigh to my hip. His hands smoothed and caressed until my whole body was tight and trembling. He pulled away, stood up, and carefully screwed the cap back on, the movement flexing his naked pectorals. I exhaled in a rush before I ran a hand through my hair. You're going to give me a stroke. I thought I did give you a stroke. Several, in fact. Do you need more? I whacked his leg. None of that. Get to bed unless you have more excuses to keep you here. He stared at me for a long time before he closed his eyes, nodded slowly, and turned away. He put on his shirt, his muscles disappearing beneath the fabric. At my door, he turned and gave me a long, slow look before he nodded, flicked his eyebrows, and turned, closing the door firmly behind him. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 37. Which? I spent all night dreaming about Drake. The things my dream self was capable of on stairs with Drake were shocking. I woke up in the morning fuzzy and cranky. When I came out of my room, Zach was sitting on the couch. He stood up when he saw me. I'll walk with you to breakfast. I gave him the brightest smile I was capable of. Sounds good. Are you okay? I heard what happened on the steps. You're lucky Drake was there to break your fall. I stopped walking for a minute, frowning at the students in the corridor ahead of us, heading towards the dining room or classes. I don't need Drake to break my fall. How does it make sense for both of us to fall down the stairs instead of just one of us? Am I more breakable than Drake? He nodded, his eyes wide and sincere. Drake is really tough. No offense, Penny, but you're not. I punched his shoulder and he shook his head. Was that supposed to hurt? I lifted both of my fists and crouched down before I sighed and straightened up. Of course it wasn't supposed to hurt. Why would I hurt you? You're the only one who likes all the flavors of my lollipops." With that, I gave him a handful of lime, which he tucked into his bag with a wide smile. "Last night after you guys hung out in your room, he came in my room and kept me up for hours." "What did you talk about?" Not like I cared. "That much." Zach smiled slightly. "Different things. Whether he should stop flirting with you so people stop bugging you, or if that would make things worse in the long run. Who should compete in the next chemist tourney? The best way to take neem oil out of wool." He just kept talking until I finally kicked him out. "I think he really liked falling down the stairs with you. You guys could go to the dance as Jack and Jill." I stared at him. I couldn't let Zach think that I was going to the dance with Drake, that I was serious about him or he would never marry me. "We're not actually going to the dance." I agreed to let him tell people that so girls wouldn't get so crazy about him. He stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing. "You're not actually going to the dance with him." He nodded slowly and resumed walking. "That makes sense. He's really annoying." I laughed and shook my head. "That's true. What is with the howling?" "I think he's a wannabe werewolf." Zach snorted. "It's his spirit animal. Also, most girls really like it." "Does he do it to make girls like him?" Zach shook his head. "Nah, he's always run around howling. I don't know why. Maybe he is a werewolf." I snickered. "He has such big eyes. And sharp teeth. And big ears." "I heard that." I gasped and turned around to see Drake leaning against a pillar in the early morning light, his arms bare in spite of the chill. We were talking about... Zach interrupted me. "The fairytale dance. You guys could go as the big bad wolf and Little Red Riding Hood." Drake cleared his throat and held out a brown paper bag to me. I took it gingerly, half expecting a wolf to jump out at me. But of course, a wolf wouldn't fit. But an extremely short-skirted dirndl did. I held up the green and pink thing, the white blouse with way too wide neck, the black shoes and white knee-high socks. It was all so adorable. "This is cute." I whirled around and the skirt spun with me because it was about 50 layers of lace and chiffon. "You said you wanted vengeance, right?" Drake murmured, moving close to put a hand on my arm. I inhaled deeply before I beamed up at him. "I only hope all my bruises are healed because I don't think this skirt is going to cover very much thigh." "That's what makeup is for." He stepped closer, his knee brushing mine while my chest tightened. Zach cleared his throat. "So, Jack and Jill?" "Hansel and Gretel." I whirled to him. "Isn't it fabulous? Drake is going to wear lederhosen, and we are going to look so great." Zach blinked at me, then gave Drake a sidelong glance. "Hansel and Gretel are siblings." Drake shrugged. "Our hair is complementary." Zach cleared his throat. "Sounds pretty taboo if you ask me." I rolled my eyes. "Like a wolf and a girl together are worse than a brother and sister. Or the girl and the creepy old man who wants her baby. Or the unconscious girl and the prince. Or the other unconscious girl and the prince. Or the prince dressed as a bear. Never mind, that one is really hot. Anyway, Hansel and Gretel were probably switched at birth or something." Drake cleared his throat. "Yeah, and the guy's actually a changeling elven prince who can give the girl bliss through endless nights of shared immortality." I glanced over at Drake, swallowing as he smiled at me seductively. I cleared my throat and projected my voice so everyone could hear us who wanted to or didn't want to. "Right. Anyway, thanks so much for this super adorable Gretel costume, Drake, because now I'll be so cute and fabulous at the dance that I'm going to with you. It was so thoughtful and caring and brilliant for you to get us matching costumes." Zach winced. That was loud. Drake smiled slightly. "I think that does it." I hesitated before I launched myself at him, forcefully enough that he should have fallen back a step, but he only braced himself and slid his hands over my lower back, holding me closer to his body. Oh dear, I can't wait to dance in your arms all night long. I surged up to my tiptoes, hesitated a breath away from his lips, then turned away, a hand on my forehead while I looked faint from being close to so much Drake. Okay, I was faint from being close to him, but he would naturally think it was my fabulous acting skills. He fought back a laugh as he let me go, struggling to keep a dangerous and seductive look on his face. I'll see you later, sister. Zach winced while I held on to my manic smile until he was out of range. That was really sad. Zach shook his head. It would be better if he went as the wolf. As Hansel, he'll just confuse people. Friday came, and it was the night before the dance. I went in to dinner with Viney, ignoring the stares of envy and hatred. I should just let them rip Drake apart like a pack of wolves. Wolves. My mouth watered for some reason, and it probably wasn't the extremely beautiful lasagna sitting on its white plate in front of me. We were at the little table in the corner Drake usually sat at. But he wasn't there at dinner. I could have asked Viney where he was, but I liked pretending not to be interested. Drake's at polo practice. That's nice. Are you going to the dance? She snorted. To watch you and Drake try to dance. I've heard stories about your lethal ballet maneuvers. Honestly, it will probably be hilarious. I'll think about it. Have you ever thought about having a make-out party? She leaned forward, staring at me over her chicken cacciatore with the gaze of a hungry predator. I swallowed the bite of lasagna I'd just put in my mouth and gave her my least freaked out stare. Make-up party? That is such a great idea. She rolled her eyes and leaned closer, keeping her voice low. Make out. You know, kind of a mashup of people all kissing at the same time. I leaned forward until we were only inches apart. How would that even be physically possible? She shrugged and stabbed a piece of chicken. It could be a not big deal, just Zach and Drake. I giggled and pointed my fork at her. You're trying to make out with Drake. Very subtle, Viney. I don't think it sounds very fun. I'd probably end up sitting there in super uncomfortable jeans watching two guys fight over you again. I know, we could have telenovelas on, so I have something to do. Of course I was not about to go anywhere near the making out of Drake. If I kissed him, I wouldn't ever be able to stop. Just look at how ridiculous I'd been on the stairs, hovering over certain death but not caring even a little bit because Drake was beneath me and his leg. She sighed and wrinkled her nose at me. The idea of Zach and Drake making out with me is nauseating. No, you'd have to keep Zach occupied. I rolled my eyes. All I have to do is dress up in a black bodysuit and paint my hair black and my face white. With black lips. Tons of coal. It would help if I was two-dimensional. She smiled slightly as she eyed me. You are so flat, you're practically one-dimensional. Hey, very funny, Shorty. Are you going to be around tonight? She shook her head. I'll be busy with the make-kiss. I nodded. I'll probably get sucked into playing video games with Zach, although it would be way better if I could trick him into watching telenovelas with me. Maybe I can think of an actor who looks like Pitch. Good luck with that. We got up, put our plates away, and separated, me heading for my room and her to her nocturnal fighting band or whatever. I stopped suddenly as Wit stepped out of the shadows, her hair not quite as perfect as usual, wearing jeans and heels. If I'd looked anywhere near as perfectly seductive as she did, I should have had guys absolutely crawling over me. Why did you do this? What did I ever do to you? Her voice was thick with tears as her eyes widened and grew moist and dewy. Where had she learned to cry on demand? She held up a long silk red dress and cloak that shimmered in her hands. I had no idea, but I could pretend. I think in a past life you cut me off on the freeway. I think I blame my horrible driving on you." Her eyes narrowed as she shook the fabric in my face. "Someone heard you telling Viney that it would be funny if someone cut up my costume, and now it is. You did it. Admit it." I stared at her, then down at the silk. Had I said something about cutting up a costume? I couldn't remember. I stared at the silk, transfixed by the swirl of blood-red fabric before I looked up at her. "Whitley, you don't know me very well, but I would never hurt red silk. I'd sooner go slasher on her." I pointed at the brunette standing at Whitley's shoulder. I forced a sympathetic smile. "If you need help fixing your dress, I'd love to. I'm sure we can get it ready before the dance." She stiffened and curled her lips. "I'm not wearing some patched dress that you ruined. Maybe you didn't cut it up, but you gave someone the idea and are still guilty of the crime." I sighed. "What do you want me to do about it if you don't want me to fix it?" She smirked and lifted her chin like she'd won. "Give me your costume and take this trash in exchange." I stared at her. "You want to go as Gretel?" Oh, seriously? She wanted to match Drake. I was torn between wanting to scratch her eyes out and wanting to light her face on fire. I bit my bottom lip while I struggled with the visceral rage. Whitley touching something Drake had given me? Never. I'd sooner burn it and dance in the ashes. I opened my mouth, then stopped. It was all very well to pretend to go to a dance with Drake to irritate girls like Whit. But every day I got closer to Drake. Closer to Drake, closer to losing my mind, my heart. Drake was my enemy. I couldn't forget that. He would be furious if he saw Whitley in the beautiful dirndl. Maybe so angry that he'd leave me alone and stop being so sweet that I couldn't help but want to nibble on him. I inhaled deeply and gave her a sweet smile through gritted teeth while my heart ached. "Sure, Whitley. We'll trade costumes, although they probably won't fit exactly. I'm a little bit taller than you. But if that would make you feel better about the cruel prank someone played on you, I'd love to help. Come to my room and I'll get it for you." She looked surprised for a moment before she smiled victoriously and followed me with her band of troubled beauty queens to Lilac Stories. Whitley stayed in the doorway to the commons, not quite coming in while I went to fetch the dress I'd hung up on my wall over the kiss or kill tapestry. It was an adorable dress. So cute, so perfectly woodland to go with my bedroom theme. It even had little deer cutouts along the hem. I hesitated, considering putting itching powder inside it, but that would hurt the dress. It was for the best. I couldn't hang on to Drake or anything he gave me. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed it and carried it out. I tried to smile, but instead felt sick when she grabbed it with her claw-like fingers. Not really sensible nails, actually. "Maybe next time, you'll think before you wish harm on somebody else." She shoved the clouds of red silk into my arms and turned to dance out, so graceful and lovely, while I groaned and threw the silk across the room. It spooled out in a long swirl, truly gorgeous fabric that would have looked incredible on Whit, blood red with her dark hair and pale skin, like Snow White or something. I sighed and went to Zach's door, knocking on it hesitantly. Maybe he was sleeping or gone or playing video games or something. He opened his door and smiled at me. I let out a relieved sigh when I saw that he had a shirt on. "Hey, Penny. What's up?" I wrinkled my nose. "I'm such a lawn chair." Whit confronted me, and I folded like a bad poker hand. "You know what I need? Video games." "Will you play with me?" He smiled and nodded, grabbing his box of old games and system. He slid on the silk as he walked across the room. "What's with the red?" I sighed and curled up in the corner of the couch while he hooked up the cords. "Do you think that Whit's legs are as good as mine?" He glanced up from his position kneeling in front of the screen. "Hold on. Let me see if I can guess what Whit wanted. She took the costume Drake gave you and traded it for her little Red Riding Hood, right? I nodded glumly. I wasn't going to the dance with Drake anyway, but I really liked that dress. I thought I could use it for a tea party sometime. He nodded like that made sense, then flopped beside me and handed me a controller. Your legs are much better. I'm not sure the two of you have the same kind of. He waved his hands around in an hourglass shape, and I rolled my eyes, pushing Zach over. The silk is gorgeous, even if red isn't really my color. Maybe if I have the right lipstick. Zach shrugged. There will be hundreds of Red Riding Hoods, because Drake's the big bad wolf. The silk was gorgeous. I had a lot of black dye and a lot of experience dyeing things black. I could wear black for one day, right? What was I thinking about? I wasn't going to the dance with Drake, but maybe I could go with Zach and find his whole heart key in the process. Did I still want to marry Zach even though he was in love with the poster? I liked him much better than anyone else at school, so that was a yes. I swallowed. What are dances here like? He shrugged. I guess they're like people dancing. I nudged him over again, his shoulder against mine. Kind of a lot of body contact, but he didn't seem to mind, just nudged me back. Do you have a live band, a disco ball, fancy refreshments, or a dance show? He frowned at me. You've never been to a dance? I shrugged and shook my head. Isn't that sad? So why aren't you going with Drake? He makes me nervous. I tangled my fingers together. Also, other girls make me nervous when I'm with him. Also, dancing with him is always a disaster. He nudged me. We could go and hang out for a little while tomorrow, if you'd like. Not like together, just going there as friends to see the decorations and watch the dancing, and maybe, if you're brave, a dance or two. I bit my bottom lip before I gave him my most sincere smile. Really? I think you'd have to be the brave one to dance with me. Are you sure? He grinned and turned back to the video game. What's going on? Drake's voice filled the room, and me, bringing back my most recent weird stairs dream. I couldn't think of anything to say that wasn't about the dance that I didn't want to talk about other than, Viney wants to have a make-out party. Zach swung around to stare at me while I blushed and refused to look at Drake. Drake did not make it easy because he leaned on the arm of the couch directly over Zach's head to stare at me. When? I stared at him and forgot to breathe. When? Zach shoved him away. You know that Viney would be making out with you. We have zero chemistry and you're the chemistry captain. Drake glowered at Zach. Well, maybe I'd start out with Viney, but eventually. His head swung to me and I held up my hands, squeezing back into the corner of the couch. Not me. I was going to watch telenovelists while you three got it on. I mean, I'd watch you guys for a little while, but it would probably get boring, you know? No dialogue. Zach snorted. You think it would work to have a make-out party with only 3 people? It may as well be me and Drake making out. I think that I'm more attracted to Drake than Vine, but it's a toss-up. Drake smacked Zach across the chest. Don't give lollipop ideas. Too late. Would you guys really make out? Drake turned to look at me, his eyes narrow. Of course. If the stakes were right, I'd do anything. What kind of stakes do you need? He smiled sharply. Come on, Zach. Let's do this. Wait. I don't actually want to see that. Really, and I'm not being tied to any stakes. Drake stood up and gestured for Zach, who rose slower, glancing at the controls regretfully. Drake grabbed Zach's shoulders and pulled him roughly close, but it was more like martial arts practice than anything romantic. I went over and took Drake's hand, tugging it off Zach's shoulder. Drake raised an eyebrow. You think the hip is a better hold. You're right. He pulled his hand out of mine and put it on Zach's hip instead. I shook my head and stepped away, crossing my arms over my chest. Drake, I was joking. Really, really, really joking. Zach looked over at me and grinned while he put a hand on Drake's back. Penny, you really blush well. I turned away with my eyes squinched closed. If you insist on doing this, you should do it right. Zach, your other hand should be tangled in Drake's hair. Give us the count, Penny, Drake said. Count? I looked up at the two guys, and they immediately lunged towards each other. Drake snapped at Zach's face, sharp teeth flashing while Zach twisted his fingers in Drake's hair, jerking his head back. I stared with wide eyes for a second before they went down on the ground, twisting and struggling to kill each other. Guys, I don't think that's making out. Sure it is, Drake said, coming up with Zach in an uncomfortable-looking hold. Feel free to join in at any time. Zach kicked up and knocked Drake over into the little side table. It cracked and shattered impressively. I took a step away from the struggling pile of testosterone. Definitely isn't making out. This is bar fighting without the bar. I'm almost sure of it. I perched on the back of the couch to stay out of the way while they rolled around. Professor Vale came in with a bunch of groceries, and I waved at her while she wrinkled her nose at the two boys, but didn't say anything as she went into her room and closed the door with a thud. When they were directly behind the couch, I put my feet on them like a rocking, violent footrest. For some reason, this violence didn't bother me at all. Weirdly enough, I am kind of tempted to join you guys, but I think you would pull my hair. Drake lifted his head and grinned at me, holding Zach's face against floor with his arms crossed behind him. You could put it up like in ballet. I pursed my lips and shook my head. I am just going to enjoy the show. I'm so glad you guys aren't actually making out. We are making out, right, Zach? He grinned at Zach, who gave him that wild smile, the crazy one I'd only seen a few times. Zach bit Drake hard and deep in his arm. Drake howled and punched Zach in the face. What was that, Zach? I leaned forward to put a hand on Drake's chest to hold him away from Zach. Biting is completely normal in making out, I said. Usually not the kind of bite that leaves teeth marks, but he didn't break the skin. Good job, Zach. Is your face okay? Drake's chest rose and fell beneath my hand, damp from sweat, and smelling so strongly of black cherry that my mouth watered. Drake said, his face is fine. It was a love tap. I raised my eyebrow and turned to Zach, but Drake covered my hand, pinning it in place. Drake, I'm checking Zach's injury. You need to demonstrate to me exactly how biting is acceptable in making out. I think Zach's disqualified. His voice was low, rough, while his breathing hard and heavy, heart beating beneath my palm. I stared at Drake, then bent down and put my teeth on the side of his hand. The one over mine. I meant to kind of shock him into letting me go, but instead I tasted him and I didn't want to stop. I sank my teeth slowly into his skin, scraping it while I slid my tongue over his flesh. I bit down a little bit harder, feeling his skin stretch taut between my teeth before I sucked on his skin and tasted black cherry. Zach's hand on my shoulder broke me out of my reverie, and I pushed away from Drake, blinking up at him while my tongue tingled and lips trembled. Drake's eyes were wide, pupils dilated as he stared at me, his chest still rising and falling rapidly. He bit his bottom lip, and I bit mine, hallucinating his teeth on the soft pad. Drake inhaled deeply and grinned at me. You win. Biting is absolutely allowed. Zach just isn't very good at it. Zach snorted. I must need more practice. Come here, Drake. Let me practice on your leg. I laughed and edged away from them, my eyes straying to Drake. The way he cradled his hand to his chest and stared at me like he knew what I was thinking and wanted. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 38. Which? The red silk was indeed slashed to pieces. The bodice was rather skimpy with spaghetti straps, but the skirt was full and flowing while the red cloak had 5 times as much fabric as it needed. It would be beautiful in a spin. After I dyed the entire thing a rich and perfect pitch black, I deepened the bodice slashes and inserted panels of cream silk in gathers that gave the top a bit more breadth than I would naturally have. Instead of patching, I put in more slashes, more inserts of cream silk, dramatic against the black. I finished in time to make a little aphrodisiac perfume to wear with Zach. I did my makeup carefully, darkly smudged eyeliner, and almost black lips with a purple tint, like black cherry. I winced and pushed the thought away. It wasn't black cherry, but almost indigo or maroon. Burgundy, merlot, anything besides black cherry. I stood in front of the mirror and didn't want to look away. I hadn't worn black in such a long time. Even if my hair was in neat strawberry blonde ringlets, I still looked dramatic, dark, dangerous, and moody with my makeup and the dress that clung to me, like midnight slashed with moonlight. I closed my eyes tight and felt Drake's arms come around me as he danced with me, clothed in darkness and anger that matched my heart. I opened my eyes wide, smiled brightly at my reflection, a fairly terrifying sight, and whirled around to the door. "Zach?" I said as I closed the door behind me, then stopped when he looked at me from his position on the couch in jeans and a t-shirt. His eyes widened as he sat up, staring at me with a weird look on his face. "Penny? I thought you were going as Red Riding Hood." I shrugged. I had some dye. "Do you like it?" I swished the skirt, and it swirled around my ankles like black water, delicious against my legs. He coughed. "It's nice. But what are you?" "I'm the Wicked Witch, of course. Either that or the woods in the moonlight. I'm not sure if Rosewood is ready for that much subtlety." He stood up and smoothed down his shirt, then glanced down like he just realized what he was wearing. "I'm not dressed." "It's okay. I just like getting dressed up, so if you don't want to, we'll just hide under a table, steal some punch, and come back here for video games." He laughed and shook his head. "No, I will definitely get dressed. Give me a second, actually 15 minutes. I'll shower, okay?" He vaulted over the couch and left me standing there feeling kind of suddenly so excited that I had to spin around, and the dress spun so gloriously, and the cloak. And if black lipstick was all it took to make Zach look at me like that, then everything would be okay. When Zach came out, he was wearing leather pants, no-nonsense boots that laced over his calves, and a jacket as sharp as the edge of a katana. "That jacket is beautiful." I went to him and ran my fingers over the fabric, the extremely fine wool. I looked up and realized how close I was to him. I cleared my throat and backed up. "Sorry, I am kind of into fabric and jackets, and really handsome boys wearing jackets in great fabric." He grinned widely. "That's good because I'm a sucker for a girl who has a thing for fabric. You smell really good." "It's an aphrodisiac." I blinked at him while his smile grew wider. "Really? Are you trying to seduce me?" I shook my head, laughing, while I knew my face was pink. I was just trying to get in the mood. You know, dancing and dresses and stuff. I bent close to his neck and inhaled deeply while he stood stock still. I pulled away and looked up at him, going for sultry. "You smell incredible. Is your base musk with a hint of jasmine and a tone of cinnamon? I want to make Zach-flavored lollipops." He pressed his lips together and held out his arm. "Wow, Penny. You should wear that dress more often because I think it brings out your—" I raised an eyebrow as I slid my hand on his jacket sleeve. "My what?" "Temptress." I shrugged. That makes sense. It was Wit's dress. He scoffed. "That dress never belonged to anyone besides Penny Lane. I am honored to be your guide on tonight's adventure." That's what I wanted, a companion on life's adventure. A little more than friends and a little less than something too much. Maybe after tonight we would be over that line and I wouldn't have to worry about Drake stirring up my insides like an overdue volcano. We walked down the wide corridors lined with pillars, and I felt like a princess in my enormous skirt beside a handsome prince. When I looked at Zach, he met my gaze and smiled, his blue eyes slightly mischievous. I can't get over how different you look. I feel a little bit nervous. I gave him a demure smile, gazing at him beneath my eyelashes. I'm still the same lollipop girl, but I am kind of excited to pretend to be something else for a little while. You look like a Prince Charming. What would the Wicked Witch do with one of those? He scowled darkly, startling me before he flashed a smile and resorting once again to his glower. I am a huntsman. Can't you tell, Leatherpants? But the jacket. At his renewed glower, I pressed my lips together. Yes, definitely a huntsman. The lack of axe threw me off for a second. I gripped his arm tighter and leaned into him. I'm not sure if the Wicked Witch and the huntsman should be seen together. No. The huntsman did go around and collect hearts for the witch or something. That's disgusting. He shrugged. Anything for my queen. Oh, that's right. That was the evil queen who was also a witch. Wasn't she the most beautiful woman in the world? He glanced at me, and something about his expression made me nervous. You'll hold your own against the other evil queens that will be there tonight. We climbed the stairs lined with men dressed in black like the men who had climbed the platform with the lightning in their hands. I pressed closer to Zach as we passed them, their eyes directed forward as though we were invisible. I lifted my skirts high in my hand that didn't hold Zach's arm, so I didn't trip on them. It's like Cinderella. He laughed. Now you're Cinderella. I shrugged. I don't have a curfew, and I didn't come in a pumpkin. We stepped out on the balcony at the top of the stairs, and I paused because spread out below us was a crowd of swirling dancers dressed in elaborate gowns and dancing intricate steps. The music was a waltz, but these people waltzed like they'd been doing it their whole lives. What do you want to do first, Penny? I blinked while I walked forward, leaning against the balcony instead of walking down the steps on either side immediately into the dancing. Instead of cheesy cutouts dangling from the ceiling with pom-poms and balloons, it was like the woods had spilled into the room, mist curling along the ground between dancers, silver trees stretching long arms above, dripping with leaves that glowed and sparkled. A moon hung from the ceiling, and stars twinkled in the distance. A breeze rushed past my cheek that smelled like grass and dew and fallen leaves. 2 walls were glass doors open to let in the night. I spun around to grip Zach's hands. Thank you. This is more beautiful than I imagined. If you want to go back, I've already had my fill of perfection. He smiled widely and shook his head. No, you haven't tasted the bubbling cider or coconut silk. Come on, there is so much to taste. Zach held my hand as he led me running down the stairs to the left, and I laughed as my slippers barely touched the marble steps, my silk gown rippling around me until I felt like I was flying. Long tables in thick white tablecloths were laden with a bewildering assortment of delicacies. There was a goat with its horns still attached with other animals cooked inside it, including a duck, beak and all. I was staring at that when Zach pressed something cloud-like to my lips. I parted, and yes, clouds and also coconut with chocolate and something darker, something richer that made me tremble and slide my hands down my bodice over the black silk. It's called pleasure, which I'm sure you understand. Would you like another? I smiled, and with that he had another of the cloud confections against my lips. I laughed and ate, then floated along with him as he went to the next incredible thing I had to try. Everything was beautiful, delicious, incredible, and the bubbling cider actually bubbled, like cold bubbles that continued bursting in my champagne flute as I held it to my lips and it tickled my nose. I was laughing from the bubbling cider when I noticed people staring at me. I stopped laughing and moved closer to Zach. I wasn't sure why, but I felt more vulnerable in black, like I was without my macaroon armor to keep all the hatred and anger at bay. "What's wrong?" He cocked his head, and I smiled tremulously. "I'm feeling a little weird. Maybe we should call it a night." He put his hand on my waist and pulled me against him in a smooth movement straight out of a dream. The clouds beneath my feet made me feel like I was in a dream, and Zach looked like a handsome prince, sweeping me across the floor with his firm yet gentle grip. I didn't stumble, didn't get nervous and elbow him in the head, just floated across the floor, staring into his blue eyes as if he was the only person in the world. My heart accelerated just the right amount while he pulled me closer, his scent a tantalizing, comforting smell, like baked bread or cookies. "Zach." "You smell so nice," I murmured as I rested my cheek on his shoulder, the collar of his jacket rough on my sensitive skin. He tightened his hand on my waist and we spun, dizzying, deliriously fast. I laughed, breathless, as I stared at him, and he stared down at me, his eyes locked on mine, the blue deepening, darkening as he leaned down, his nose brushing mine, our lips so close I could taste his breath, the flavor of pleasure. A scream ripped through the melodic violins and cellos, silencing the room. Zach turned us towards the balcony where the scream had come from. I stared at a spike-haired girl who perched on the edge of the balustrade, then froze and felt my heart crack as she jumped. She didn't fall forward to be skewered on the waiting soldier, but landed lightly on the marble floor like she'd fallen a foot, not 15. She glared at us as she came, moving faster and faster until she was a blur of black while I clung to Zach. "Get away from him, he belongs to me." Her voice cracked through the air like a whip, and Zach jerked like the lash had landed on his skin. I looked up at Zach, and he met my eyes for a moment when I was certain he would bend his lips and finish the kiss we'd almost started. But instead, he blinked, smiled slightly, and let me go. I stood there alone while the dancers around me came into suddenly sharp focus. So many girls in blood red sneered at me, their eyes full of poison words I didn't want to hear. I turned to Viney in time to see her grip Zach's arm, her hand strong and unyielding. "Viney, I didn't think you were coming to the dance. Where's your dress?" She didn't look at me, just dragged Zach away, putting his hand on her waist as they fell into the steps of the waltz that wasn't playing. I stared after them, my heart pounding until the music began again, the fog swirling around their feet. Viney moved beautifully, like a glorious fey creature in the arms of her handsome prince. Hers, not mine. My hands were shaking as I gripped the edges of my cloak, pulling it around me as though that would keep anyone from seeing me standing deserted and pathetic, unwanted in the middle of the dance floor. This was not how the fairy tale was supposed to go. No, it was because I hadn't come as the princess, but the witch. I was supposed to come after they hadn't invited me and curse them all. My fingers ached while my stomach twisted with nausea. A pair of dancers knocked into me, then another and another until I felt like I was a leaf spinning in rapids. The dancers spinning around and around until a strong hand slid around my waist, and he pulled me against his chest, a boulder unmovable against the onslaught of all the forces in the world. I stared at his chest, unblinking at the wolf eye in a golden circle at his throat. "You're not wearing lederhosen. And you let Wit have your dress." He turned so I could see Wit wearing my dirndl. It shouldn't have fit her, but she must have had it altered. She looked beautiful and enchanting, walking through the woods in search of something edible. Something like Drake, all long legs, impossibly slender cinched waist, and bosom perched precariously in a bed of snowy linen. I turned so I was once more facing his chest and stared at that wolf eye for a long time before I could lift my eyes to his. He looked fierce, green sparks in his eyes, russet hair, his lips in a thin line of disapproval. I'd had enough disapproval for one night. I tried to step away from him, but he didn't let me go. Drake, I'm tired. Please. He pulled me harder against him until I could feel the contours of his bare chest through my silk gown. I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want Wit to see you humiliated. I pulled my lips back to snarl at him. That's what you care about. What Wit thinks. She's a nothing, a purposeless viper that strangles herself in her own coils. Do you have any idea how meaningless humiliation is? Humiliation is a gift that reminds me of the price of love. Do you want me to dance with you, to show Whitley? I stepped forward into him while he stepped back. Then I slid my hands up his chest, my nails pressing into his skin, but not cutting. I wrapped my hands around his neck, over the heavy chain, and pulled him down to me while I rose into him, sliding my silk-encased body against him, arching while I pulled his head down until his lips touched my throat. Fire came to life in my veins as my heart thrummed and he inhaled, so deep, like he would drown in my skin. He moved against me somehow with the music, although it was not a waltz. I ran my hand up to his hair, tangling, tugging while I shifted against him with so little separating us. The music came to a stop and I froze. My arms wrapped around him, my forehead pressed against his cheek, while his chest rose and fell against mine, every inhale sending a frisson of desire through me. I wanted him. I trembled to take him, to make him mine, to declare it to the world the way Viney had Zack. I wanted him with an uncontrollable roaring that magnified 1,000 times as I rested against him, the scent of dark cherries, dark forests, night wind rustling through me and bringing my whole soul to life. Another song began. This one modern and throbbing, the light seeming to lower, the room darkening until I no longer felt on display, but worse, secluded in a room of anonymous bodies. Penny, he whispered, his voice sweet and low. I care about you, not anyone else. Certainly not Whitley. I want you to dance with me because it's what you want and you're not afraid to take what you want. I shuddered while his hands seemed to soften on me, gentle and persuasive instead of hard and unyielding. His body nudged me backwards, his legs brushing mine through the silk, what I wanted. I wanted so much to sway against him, and for a moment I did, looping my arms around his neck while he cradled me against his chest, our legs tangling as we moved. His hand slid up my back until he reached the bare skin of my shoulder blades beneath my cloak. He spread his hand and brushed lightly while I trembled and clung to him. His hands urged me closer and closer to him until I found myself staring into his eyes, the tip of his nose brushing my cheek as he bent down, his breath dark, sweet, heady. I closed my eyes and tilted my head back, every nerve extended, but in that moment, instead of focusing on the slight copper tinge to Drake's scent, I heard Whitley's laugh. Her amused voice, "It looks like Drake has another toy to play with." It was enough to pull me away from the sheer drop of absolutely lost. I twisted out of his arms and slid through the dancers, my body once more mine, heart pounding. Mind focused on one purpose, escape, as quickly and completely as possible. I fled through the silver trees and through the open glass doors, over the patio that gleamed silver in the moonlight, down the steps and over the grass as I ran towards the woods, deep and dark that beckoned like waters, waves I could drown in. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 39. Which? I ran through the trees, feeling steadier the further I went from the ball. Ball, not dance. That whole experience had been surreal, completely bizarre in absolutely every way. It seemed like I'd hallucinated the Viney thing. Why would she do that? It made no sense. Not when she'd said over and over that her and Zack were not dating, that they had no chemistry, etc. Was there any way to salvage my plans with Zack? I couldn't marry someone who would leave me in the middle of a pack of wolves, the second Viney called him. I needed someone like Revere was to my mother, someone reliable and cold, someone who I could think around. I also needed someone who would marry me that wasn't in love with a poster. I stumbled over an exposed root and caught my balance on the tree trunk. I stood there, panting from my run. I slid down the trunk and pulled the cloak around my shoulders, fiddling with the cord. I inhaled deeply, filling my body, my head with the night, the sharp cry of crickets, the scent of dusty leaves, the cool wind that brushed my skin, rustling in my hair. Penny. I stiffened as Drake took shape from the shadows. He stared at me for a long time before he sat down, across from me at the base of another tree, his arms as bare as his chest. My voice came out nearly emotionless. You were not very well dressed for the ball. I didn't know that you wanted a prince. A huntsman. At least someone with a shirt. He cleared his throat. You are dressed perfectly. I hadn't pictured you in that kind of dress, but it suits you. I shifted. We were not complimenting each other. I'm glad you came so you can help me find my way back to my room. I'm so helpless and stupid. Shall we get going? I stood up and started walking back the way we'd come. Where did you get the dress? Whitley gave it to me. Whitley wouldn't fit in that dress. I glanced at him, then away, pulling the cloak tighter around me. I dyed the red silk and made it more interesting. I'm sure Whitley didn't realize the potential of the slashed dress in my hands, but I'm used to working with raw and ruined materials. She looked beautiful in my dress. It was a really great dress. Drake, don't you think that you should stop being stubborn and fall in love with her? He laughed, but it was short and not amused. I'll do that as soon as you fall for Jackson. Of the two, I'd rather fall for him. Do you think Jackson would like me? I tugged on the cord and felt it slide through the channel of fabric. He exhaled sharply. No, I think that he would like to ruin you, but that's not the same thing. Isn't it? All the boys here are so confusing. It must be because I'm so stupid and naive that I can't tell the difference between a guy who likes me and a guy who doesn't. Can I tell you a secret? I thought that Zach almost liked me for a minute when we were dancing, but he wouldn't have left me like that if he'd even liked me a little bit at all, even as friends. He grunted. It wasn't his best moment, but it wasn't really his. And Viney coming in like that after we went bra shopping together. It's like she was trying really, really hard to make me trust her just so she could go insane on me in the middle of the ball. Not like I mind that. But what's with you coming up to me without a shirt after that whole thing when you knew I was vulnerable and weak? Not that I don't expect it. But how could you possibly pretend that you care? Come out here all, Penny. Don't get lost in the woods. Let me help you find your way, even though everyone knows that I'm the big bad wolf, and I'll howl at you if you show any signs of forgetting. Don't worry, Drake. I remember. I think that the trouble is that I'm genetically predisposed to prefer wolves over regular people. He put his hand on my shoulder, pulling me to a stop. Penny, you don't have to pretend that you're fine. I'm not fine. I'm incredibly frustrated by what should have been the perfect night with you. It should have been me feeding you pleasure and spinning you through clouds. I laughed. Drake feeding me pleasure. Yes, I'm sure that's just what I need. More pleasure, more desire, more weakness for you. I yanked hard on the cord of my cloak, and it came out while I wrapped it around my hand. You say that as though you want me. I spun around to face him, a dark and irresistible shadow that watched and waited for my final mistake. Are you so desperate to be wanted? He stepped closer. So desperate, yes. I never knew what this felt like before, wanting someone always a little bit out of reach, wanting so desperately that I forget my pride. Is that what you fear, losing your pride, your independence? I try to give you space. When you flinch away from me with fear in your eyes, I want to hurt someone, but I'm trying. Tonight was my fault. When I saw you with Zach, I lost control. I would have hurt him very badly if Viney hadn't stepped in. I closed my eyes for a moment, silk cloak swirling around my ankles before I stepped closer to him. It's so easy for you to hurt people. You say what you want so regularly. You must be used to getting it. How lucky to be Drake the Wolf. How lucky that your humility comes at no real price. What do you want, Penny? I'll do everything in my power to give it to you. I swallowed hard while I twisted the cord in my hand. It was too much. I twisted the cord into a very specific knot and slid it over his hand while I gazed at him, holding his attention so he wouldn't see what my hands were doing, would only feel me clinging to his fingers as I pressed him against the trunk of the tree. I let go of his hand only for a moment to toss the end of the cord around the tree, caught and knotted by my other hand, then slid over his wrist. I brushed against him, staring into his dark eyes as I tightened the rope slowly so that he didn't notice, his eyes so full of his own desire he was blind to my rage. He would notice soon enough. I twisted the cord and pulled it high, rising on my tiptoes, his hands jerking behind him. His eyes widened and he gasped while I felt a flicker of satisfaction. What did I want? I wanted Drake to feel helpless, completely terrifyingly helpless in my hands. I stretched up, securing the cord around the tree while I brushed his cheek with my lips until I pulled back, my fingertips on his naked shoulders. I cocked my head and studied him. Penny. Shh. I pressed my fingers to his lips, and he kissed them. I pulled away, frowning. You don't seem to know how this works. I have you tied to a tree. You think that I mind? I raked my nails down his chest, cutting through his silky, pale skin. He gasped, and I smiled at him. I think you should. You think that I'm different because I've worked so hard to resist you, but I'm as pathetic and weak as all the other girls who want you. You want me? He smiled, his teeth glittering as he stood, arms stretched back, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Oh, I do, Drake. You have no idea how I tremble, aching for your touch, but always more, always the one I can't have. I want to lose myself inside of you until I never remember a shred of pain again. I want you to scream my name until your lips are branded, and you never say another name again. I want... He gasped as I danced my fingers over his chest. His breathing came hard and heavy, like he was running while he strained against the cord, arms flexing. I nipped his arm right above his shoulder, tasting the sweetness of his skin. Pleasure was tasting Drake, hearing him whisper my name. I didn't want whispers, I wanted screams. I bit his shoulder hard, sinking through the skin while he shuddered. I bit down until I tasted blood. I sucked and nibbled while his body jerked, chest rising faster and faster. He was my Hansel, and I was going to gobble him all up. I laughed and slid up him to tangle my hands in his hair and press my lips, teeth to his throat. I pressed against him harder, scraping his sides with my nails while I devoured him. I touched and tasted his body from chin to belt, but the more I tasted, the more I wanted. He was like that magical candy that you couldn't stop craving once you'd tasted, and all of this would only leave me more desperate in the long run. Anger flooded my veins, that he would dare make me want him, that he would destroy my plan to do the right thing, to marry a nice boy and save my mother who I hated, that he would stand there, lips parted, eyes closed, and revel in my torment. Didn't I say that I wanted you to scream? Scream, Drake! I dug my nails into his chest, while anger and frustration bubbled out of me. His voice was sharp, but not the scream I wanted, but a gasping moan that echoed inside me. I pulled away to stare at him, his eyes unfocused as he gazed at me, soft, like his lips that I ached to touch. I trailed my fingertips over his mouth, then blinked at the red I left behind. I gasped, and stepped back, staring at his body. No longer pale and perfectly untouched, but shredded and torn, like I felt like my heart when I thought of Poppy. My breath trembled as I reached out, carefully, running my fingertips over the words I'd carved into his chest. Property of Penny Lane. I held my breath and stared at his face, stepping forward, close to cup his face in my hands, smooth up his jaw and cheeks, but everywhere I touched left a trail of red. I stared into his eyes, dark in the shadows that gazed at me unblinking, unafraid. A challenge in them to own what I'd done, what I wanted to own him. I shook my head and stumbled away. My shoulders were bare. One of my straps had snapped without me noticing. My cloak spilled across the ground. An oil spill shot through with light. I was that cloak, all black except for the tiny flickers of light I tried to capture, but I'd failed. I'd tried so hard to be someone Zach could really like, fun, happy, cute. But I couldn't keep that up forever. Not when I wasn't that person. I didn't want to be a person. I wanted to be busy with work that never ended and kept me focused away from the pain, the fear. I pulled the cloak around my shoulders, settling it in place before I looked at Drake one last time. He stared at me, willing me with his eyes to touch him, to hold him, to love him as though I had love inside of my broken heart to give. Penny. Darkly Sweet, Chapter 40. Wish. When I got to Lilac's stories, I stopped short when I heard the voices of Zach and Viney arguing. Viney's voice was shrill. He talked to Jackson. He knows who broke into Penny's room. He was going to confront you with it. If he hadn't gone to your room before going to the ball, I wouldn't have gotten there in time, and you. Do you think I'm afraid of Drake? Zach's low growl made my stomach lurch. He sounded like a wolf. I leaned against the wall outside of the Lilac Commons, while my heart pounded. Viney hissed. You should be. He wants her. Zach barked a short laugh. I know. I can't blame him. But if you think I'm going to stand by and let my friend throw his life away on a witch who knows how to be precisely the poison he craves, he actually likes it. The tea parties, the community service. Somehow she figured out exactly what he couldn't resist and then put on that whole act, not wanting him so that he'd find her even more irresistible. You're full of it. I saw you dancing with her. That wasn't you helping out a friend. It was you stealing your friend's girl. You were going to kiss her. Yes, and then I was going to take her and... I walked in the room because I didn't want to listen anymore. They turned quickly to stare at me while I ran my fingers over the edges of the cloak. Viney glared at me before whirling away, heading towards her room. Zach's jaw tightened while he stared at me, his eyes alight with wild energy as he studied me. Penny, I thought you'd be with Drake longer. I tried to beam brightly, but my face was numb. Did you? His eyes narrowed as he took a step towards me. Did you hear that? All I hear is the drone of disaffected arrogance. I walked towards him. Well, towards my door, which was behind him. But when I veered to walk past him, he sidestepped, blocking me. I stared at his chest, the beautiful jacket mocking me. You heard that I'm the one who trashed your room? I flinched before I shook my head. No, I've already heard too much today. My ears are full. I will have to hear that tomorrow. You hacked into my limo, my room. That would have been enough, but the way you seduced Drake. I looked up at his face, shock breaking through. You're mental, seriously deranged. Move, Zach. I'm going to bed now. He grabbed my shoulders, his fingers biting into my skin, but not painfully, just firm. No, since I'm deranged, you understand that I'm not letting you go until you explain how you knew how to seduce Drake, using me and Viney in your whole plan. I blinked at him. Well, it started when I was 8. I saw my first telenovela and realized that my life's mission was seducing arrogant rich jerks who had nothing better to do than run around hurting people and playing polo while hurting people. When I saw Drake's photo on the Rosewood page, I thought to myself, that looks like the kind of guy that Marionetta would try to seduce. So naturally, I packed all the clothing that he would like, because I thought a complete and absolute ass like Drake Huntsman would be helplessly drawn to someone sweet and fun, cute and kind. Because that makes sense. And then I got a room here with you and Viney, not because I also saw you on that Rosewood page and thought that you looked nice and kind of fun, but because you were old friends with Drake, which I knew because you don't have any pictures together, and the only interaction I saw was of him kicking the crap out of you after he tried to hang you. So, obviously, me being roommates with Drake's friend Zach would totally make him fall in love with me, but to make sure, I had to draw it out. Separate booths at the restaurant? My diabolical way of giving him a sample of sequin bliss without getting the whole fortune cookie. I stared at him and shook my head. You are a complete imbecile. I thought you had sort of a brain floating beneath that hard head, but turns out not even a flicker. His eyes flared bright blue, and he gripped my shoulders harder while he turned me, pushing me against my door, knocking my head back against the wood. I stared at him, waiting for more violence, but he only stared back. You expect me to think that you're actually this sweet little bonbon? That you really care about children and animals? I swallowed hard and struggled not to cry. I'd worked so freaking hard to make him like me. All this time wasted, all this effort. I'd actually thought he was my friend. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe be enough that I wouldn't be miserable with him. I guess I did. But I'm kind of stupid too. I thought you were actually a nice guy. Instead, you're just a jerk who knows how to pretend to be something else. I used to wear black clothes, though. You nailed that part. I also didn't smile, but I didn't really have anyone to smile at, so maybe that was part of it. He pushed me against the door again, his face close to mine, as close as it had been when I'd thought he was going to kiss me, but he looked like he was about to bite my face. Are you going to stand here and let me push you around? I frowned at him. You want me to fight you? On guard. He brushed my cheek with his lips. Penny, I'm going to hold you like this, touch you, until you finally break. Finally, curse me. I sighed and closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the door. Psychotic. You want me to curse you? All right. Bonbons and ho-hos, I turn you into a toad, oops. You're already a slimy newt. I'll have to work on it. He gripped my shoulders, digging his fingers into my skin until it really did hurt. I'm going to hurt you. So hurt me. I can't cast a spell on you because I don't have magic. If I had magic, I wouldn't have picked a roommate who I thought was as picked on and hated as I was certain I'd be at this pishal school. Make me feel like my eyeballs are going to explode. Fill me with your mage fire until my skin threatens to melt off my bones. Drown me in your pain until my brain shuts down. It doesn't matter anymore. That kind of pain doesn't bother me. Have fun with it. Enjoy yourself. His blue eyes burned brighter. If you don't mind me hurting you, then you won't mind if I check you. See for myself. Wait! No, please don't. But he'd already started the spell, muttering syllables that made my skin prickle and then the horrible sensation of having my insides sucked out of me and my whole body filled up with radioactive melted marshmallows. Sticky, cloying, sickening while he searched me for the magic that I'd never had. I went limp until only his grasp on my shoulders held me upright, my head bobbing forward until it hit his shoulder, the perfect suit coat beneath my cheek, the integral reverse of my own wrecked insides. He pushed away from me, holding me up against the door while my own legs seemed to belong to someone else. The pink shoes beneath the black skirt didn't match. I stared at those shoes, then the hallucination of toes that flickered into my vision, toes covered in pud with a field past them. I blinked slowly, and the floor beneath my shoes came into focus. A swirling purple carpet that was about to be thrown up on. Yep. I closed my eyes tight, tears leaking out the corners anyway, from puke getting in my hair. I wasn't crying because after everything I'd done, all the effort I'd put into being a lovely, nice girl any boy would love, I was being tortured by some imbecile who thought I was trying to seduce Drake. Drake, who I'd left tied to a tree in the woods with my name carved in his chest. Black flickered in my vision as darkness stirred in my heart. Impotent fury. Just because I didn't have magic didn't mean that I couldn't hurt him. I raised my head until I could see Zach's face. He looked like someone had just chopped off his leg and stolen it, leaving him to hop after it pathetically. No, like someone who just heard that their favorite barbecue machine was used to capture a skunk. No, like he'd just realized what a complete and total asinine imbecile he truly was. That was always a shock. You're going to have to clean up the puke. It's in my hair. My voice came out low, terse as my throat tightened and my stomach hardened. He mumbled a word, and immediately the pile of vomit on both of our shoes decomposed along with the bits in my hair, until it was nothing but black compost. That was incredibly useful. Most magic I'd seen was from Poppy, when she showed me how weak and disgusting, pathetic and worthless I was without the power she held over me. She liked to torment me until I broke. It took a lot to break me, much more than potatoes in my hair or groups of catty girls publicly humiliating me. I'd spent my entire life learning how to control the demons, the darkness. They never helped, only hurt. I stared at Zach, and when I looked at him, I still saw my friend. The idiot who was in love with a poster. The loser who brought me soup and played easy video games with me. The guy who liked all the flavors of my lollipops. I didn't want to hurt him. I straightened my legs and stared at him, chin lifted. Is that all you've got? I can do this all day. He stepped away from me, clenching his fists until they were white. You have no magic? How is that possible? I was against my door. I turned around, moving so very slowly as I hit in the code and pressed my palm against the reader. Penny, I don't care. I stepped into my room and slammed the door behind me, locking the device in every possible way, including pushing the big red button in the middle that armed it with magic spells that would be impossible to undo. Magic and machinery was as close as I got to magic. Well, that and herders. I leaned against the inside door while I tried to breathe, to figure out a new strategy, a new plan. But I couldn't untangle my thoughts. I walked over to the mirror and stared at my reflection. My face was red, chapped from rubbing against Drake's skin, my lipstick long gone, and my eyes bloodshot while my shoulders were red from Zach's fingerprints. A glance down at my hands showed red, which should be red because I'd slashed Drake to pieces, and he'd still looked at me like he wanted me no matter what I did to him. I spun away from the mirror and went in the bathroom, ran a bath, and sat on the edge, sliding black silk through my fingers while I tried not to think of Zach or Drake. I slid the single strap off my shoulder, and the dress pooled to the ground like an oil slick. So beautiful. I washed my face, scrubbing until my skin was raw all over instead of just around my mouth, then worked on my hands and nails until I didn't have a speck of Drake's skin beneath them. I sank under the water and stayed there, holding my breath until I had an image come into my head of Drake standing there, bleeding, blood filling the air while wolves gathered around, wolves from the woods, and him helpless. I burst from the water and clambered out of the tub. I squeezed water out of my hair as quickly as I could before I wrapped a pink and white polka dot towel around my body. I left wet footprints across the floor while I hurried to my bag, where I'd left it on my bag, where I'd left it on my bed. I climbed up and sat cross-legged, phone in my hand. I checked my contacts, and there was Poppy's number. I enlarged her picture for a minute, staring into that wide smile. She was a lot like Zach, my friend who couldn't help hurting me. It was his nature, like it had been hers. My nature? Did I have one? I was in nothing, a mess of nothings. Still, I couldn't leave Drake defenseless. If he hadn't gotten out of my rope, I would have to tell Viney to go rescue him. I pushed the button with his name and stared at the empty box, waiting for a text message. Hey Drake, just wondered if wolves have ripped out your liver yet. Or, had so much fun tonight. Did you happen to see a cloak cord? I seem to have misplaced it. Or, surprise, I'm psycho. I shook my head and put a question mark in the box. I hesitated and then sent it. I sat there, rivulets of water running down my shoulders and onto the bed. The rose quilt Drake had gotten for me. I traced the swirls of vines while I waited. My phone beeped, and I stared at his message. Question mark. He'd responded with a question mark. What was that supposed to mean? It meant that his hands were free so he could text. That's what it meant. That's all I cared about. I was done pretending to be nice, pretending to like anything about him or any other person in this world. I was done pretending to be nice, pretending to like anything about him or any other person in this world. Done being Penny Macaroon Lane.
Darkly Sweet, Chapter 41. Maid. I stood tied to the tree for a long time. She's not coming back, Drake. You should probably untie your arms before you're permanently numb. My voice trembled, and I was talking to myself. She might come back. I shook my head because I could still see her face, the shock when she realized exactly what she'd done. Probably it was good that she didn't want to be the sort of witch who took whatever she wanted, but why resist when I wanted it even more than she did? It shivered as a ghost touch of her fingers brushed over my skin. I had to capture those touches, memorialize them, and I couldn't do that tied to a tree. I twisted my wrists and ran my fingers over the complicated pattern of knots that I wasn't familiar with. Dark side knots. I could have broken the cord, dissolved it, but she'd made the effort to tie the knots. I should at least put in as much effort in escaping them. It took me 15 minutes before I could untangle the knots. Me and my genius fingers, numb fingers. By the time I felt the cord give, I'd come to a conclusion about something. The next time Penny Lane tied me to a tree, I would step into dark side, then back into day side, so I could retrieve the cord with knots intact. Such resolve and decision. I stood in that clearing while I wrapped the cord around my wrist. I wanted to stay in the woods, to close my eyes and feel the breeze whisper across the gashes in my chest and pretend it was her, but there were things to do. If I didn't put something on those gashes, they would heal without a scar. With a sigh, I stepped into dark side, then back into day side in my room. I walked towards the bed, pressed my palm on the compartment above it, and then took out the red top hat when the door opened. I dumped the contents of the hat on the bed and added the cord. A lollipop stick, a hot pink hairband, a handful of receipts from the Chinese restaurant, and a folded bag with a weasel applique. I ran my hand above the objects, sending green sparks from my palm. Images formed in sparks, her face with a teasing smile that lit her eyes, thoughtful, afraid, emotions so close to the surface she could barely restrain them. She kept the witch deeply buried. I'd unearthed it tenaciously. I'd been pushing her from the first time I saw her, wanting to know more, to see beneath the rich and decadent frosting. Tonight I'd finally tasted her anger, her possession, her darkness, and it was delicious, but no more than her sweetness. I wanted more. I wanted everything. I smiled when my phone beeped and I saw her name, the image of her in profile, curls swirling around her face. Question mark. What next? I responded. Question mark. I don't know, but I can't wait to find out.